The hour is 7 o'clock, and as mayor, I hereby call to order, ooh, that's live tonight. I hereby call to order a meeting of Laconia City Council scheduled for June 24th, 2019 at this hour. As always, we'll begin our meeting tonight with a salute to our American flag. I would ask that you please rise and join Councilor Bob Hamill in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. For the record, our minutes to tonight's meeting are being kept by our city clerk, Cheryl Hebert. I would ask that she please call the roll.
Councilor Cheney.
Here.
Councilor Bounds.
Here.
Councilor Littman.
Present.
Councilor Haynes.
Here.
Councilor Hamill.
Present.
Councilor Hosmer.
Here.
Mayor Engler.
Present needs help tonight, I think, so I'll be present. Let the record show that all 6 councilors are present for tonight's meeting, and a quorum has been established. Our first order of regular business is the acceptance of minutes. Before you tonight, we have 2 sets of minutes from our special budget meeting on June 10th. The minutes of that meeting were distributed to the city council the next day on the 11th. No changes have been submitted to the clerk. And then our other set of minutes is for the regular city meeting. No, I have a conflict. Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. For the regular minutes on June 10th, and those minutes were distributed on the 13th, and no corrections were suggested to the clerk. And so unless there are any suggestions for changes at this moment tonight, I'm going to declare those 2 sets of minutes to be approved as submitted by the clerk. We have no consent and action items to consider tonight. And with the council's indulgence, I am going to, and with unanimous consent of the council, I'm going to ask for 2 changes to the agenda tonight. One, I would like to move the mayor's report from item 15 up to do now, because the mayor's report tonight has to do with the public comments that will follow immediately thereafter. And the second thing is I would like to change, for the benefit of several guests tonight, is the general budget discussion is item number 21G under old business, is the very last item on the agenda. And we have some visitors with us tonight that I think will be stressing their endurance levels if we wait until that hour to do that. So I'm going to suggest that we move that item 21G up to the first item of under unfinished business. Does anyone object to that? Okay, thank you. I'll get right into the mayor's report then. As has been reported at previous meetings and is very public information on the Colonial Theater Restoration Project front, we have identified the people on the steering committee. The city council is represented on that committee as you know, by Councilor Hamill and myself. And that committee has identified a $3 million gap as of today in between the cost of finishing the project as designed and the actual funds, both in terms of cash and pledges that we have on hand. And tonight, Councilor Hamill and I, later in the meeting when we get to budget deliberations, are going to be bringing forth a proposal for the city to fill that gap, that $3 million gap, in order to start this project relatively immediately. And I won't get into any more details at this point. We certainly will discuss that in a significant detail later in the meeting. But that's what this is all about. The Colonial project and the request for the city to fill that funding gap with another $3 million. In the past, at past meetings, I have also reported to you that you will recall that last fall, the steering committee took the redevelopment of the second and third floors of the Main Street building of the theater complex, took that out of the project, which was intended to be developed into 14 apartments in the original plan. And we took those apartments out of the plan and decided to mothball the second and third floors to save money. It was gonna cost us a significant amount of money to develop those apartments. And one of the ways we could cut costs in the overall cost of the budget was to eliminate that. We did not, however, give up on our effort to find another way to develop those 2 floors. And we have been searching started the search then for a reputable developer to buy or lease, depending on how things were structured, those 2 floors from us, from Belknap Economic Development Council, which owns the building, and develop them independently. And I think more recently, I have indicated to you that we have been in negotiations with an extremely reputable developer who has been, for the past several months, investigating the rent purchase of the second and third floors. Now he plans to build 8 to 10 spacious market rate apartments in that space on the second and third floor if we go forward with this project. And I'm pleased to inform the council and the public tonight that conversations with that developer, while not completely finalized at this point, have reached the point where I am proud to announce that Rusty and Judy McClear of Meredith are in fact that developer team. The McClears are here tonight, and in a minute, Rusty is going to have the opportunity to briefly address us about his plans and commitment to the Colonial Restoration Project. With that, I'll conclude my mayor's report, and we will turn to the next item on the agenda, which is comments by people who are with us here tonight on items that are not on tonight's agenda, and I would recognize Mr. McClear.
Reputable developer.
What a welcome already for you.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here tonight, and I've enjoyed all of our discussions over the last probably year, but I've been involved in this project for the last 10 years, frankly. And this project is something that is near and dear to my heart. It's a project that has the potential to sow the seeds of making this community a better, more profitable community. Very much like a very small project that was started in Meredith a few years ago that I no longer have anything to do with. And also a project that I did in Claremont that I'm really very proud of, and one I did in Hooksett that I'm equally proud of. And I think that this project has a chance to further the economic development of this community, and hopefully with what goes on up at the state school will bring a lot more to the community, a lot more that the community can do. This community can do a lot more. And so Jody and I have agreed to be part of this project. We'll work hard on it. We will invest in it. We have invested in it as a donator last year, I believe. And I met with the Massasoit Turpin folks on Saturday morning, and we are signing an agreement to have them work with us to do the design work. There's about 11,000 square feet there. We're going to take over the responsibility for building the elevator to the second and third floor, which originally, I believe, was part of your responsibility. And we will be building either market rent apartments or condos, but they're going to be bigger. I think they're going to be around 1,150 or 1,200 square feet apiece, and they will be first rate. And I think that we can add to what you guys are all, what the city of Laconia is trying to do by making a first-rate project in what's a first-rate city. So that's my speech, I guess.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate Jody and you being here tonight. Thank you
Okay,
very much.
Thanks. Any questions from any of you guys?
Any questions off the top? We'll be discussing this in greater detail later, but.
Okay, I'll get out of here before it gets into details. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in our audience who wishes to address the council tonight on a matter that is not on tonight's agenda? No? All right, we're going to move on to elections appointments. Tonight, we have before us the application from Gail Ober, who interviewed with us at the last meeting. And she is seeking appointment as an alternate member of the Zoning Board of Adjustment for a 3-year term expiring at the end of August 2022. At present, I think we have 4 vacancies on the alternate part of the Zoning Board of Adjustment. A motion be in order to approve the appointment of Gail Ober as an alternate member of the Zoning Board of Adjustment for a 3-year term expiring at the end of August 2022. That motion is made by Councilor Hosmer. Is there a second? Councilor Bounds, any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries. Thank you. Okay, public hearings.
That's all we're gonna do.
The always exciting public hearings. We have 2 tonight. The first one starts on page 19 of your packet. With the actual resolution to be considered is back on page 49, I believe. I'm close on that. That's not exactly right. Yeah, 49. So this is a public hearing for resolution number 2019-16 relative to authorizing the city manager to take any actions necessary to issue bonds for Court Street reconstruction Phase 2, fire engine replacement, and adding a new public works truck in the total amount of $2,025,000. Notice of this public hearing was made available in the June 12, 2019 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, the Community Center, the Public Library, and at the SAU office. Action on this item will be taken up tonight under unfinished business. So is there anyone in our audience tonight who wishes to offer testimony to the city council? Open the public hearing at 7:15 p.m. and ask if there's anyone in our audience tonight who wishes to offer testimony to the city council tonight on issuing this $2,025 million worth of bonds. No? All right, I'm going to close the public hearing then at 7:16 p.m. and we'll move to our next public hearing, which has to do with another borrowing. This is Resolution 17 relative to authorizing the city manager to take any actions necessary to issue bonds for Endicott Street Water Line Project, Court Street Bridge Replacement Project, and sewer upgrades, Union Avenue and Lakeport Elm Street Project in the total amount of $2,250,000. Notice that this public hearing was made available in the June 12, 2019 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, the Community Center, the Public Library, and the SAU office. So I will open the public hearing at 7:16 p.m. and ask if there's anyone here tonight who wishes to offer testimony to the City Council tonight about this bond issue for $2,250,000. No? All right, moving right along, I'll close the public hearing at 2:17 p.m. and remind everyone that we will be discussing, these matters will be up for a final vote under unfinished business tonight. Mayor's report we've already covered. Committee reports, government operations and ordinances. Counselor Bounds?
Well, you've got, as part of the review that we're going to be doing tonight, we've got the urban commercial zone, which we've adopted, and we're coming back to the council with respect to St. Joseph's Church and the Historic Commission. Those are the two things that we're going to be dealing with tonight. I think we'll be adopting, it's part of the agenda I'm trying to, the performance zoning itself. Am I still not close enough? We'll be adopting the performance zoning itself.
Don't be shy, Counselor.
I'm generally not.
I know.
I know.
That never crossed our mind.
And we'll be doing a request for a public hearing. We'll actually be adopting one ordinance and sending out for public hearing another ordinance as it relates to the new zoning proposals. I think everybody's familiar with that. If you want me to bring you up to date on that, we will. But the city manager has covered those items in his report fairly thoroughly, and we'll have discussion on that. So, St. Joseph's is on the agenda tonight. It was referred by the committee to the city council first. As I indicated, we were going to bring it back before the city council before we send it on to planning. There is a proposal for the Historic Commission. The committee has recommended that that proposal be referred to the planning board for further discussion and review.
All right, so we got 3 items tonight that are coming out of your committee.
Yeah, we got 3 items, and at some point I want to remove stuff from the,
Motion be in order to do that now, if you like.
okay. I'd like to remove from Public Works the 16EI, the proposal to implement city policies for designating emergency lanes. We've really done that.
Where is that?
16E, Public Works Committee.
I don't even have that on my list.
Right down at the bottom.
Oh, on Public Works.
Public Works.
I'm sorry, I thought you were still talking about government operations.
No, Public Works.
All right, so Counselor Bounds recommends that, moves that we remove item E1 from the agenda of the Public Works Committee. Is there
Well,
a
that's not
second?
the only one. E1 and E3
E1 and
from,
E3.
from Public Works, because
road
E3
as
we've
is.
already done also.
All right, so that would leave the
think we
only
have.
item on that agenda is retaining wall policy.
And I
On
think,
the agenda since Hoover was president.
I think we've completed the retaining wall policy, but I'm old and senile, so I'm not exactly sure. So we'll figure this out as we go on, but I think we've
so
actually done
1 and
that.
3 for now.
Yeah, so 1 and 3 for now.
Motion been made to eliminate items 1 and 3. Is there a second? Counselor Hosmer seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. Thank you. 6 votes in affirmative, that motion carries. So those 2 are struck. And one question I have is, did we not officially add the Historic District proposal to your Government Operations Committee agenda?
Yes.
It is not on this list.
Clerk
It was never officially moved to add it to the agenda.
Really?
So what happened, I don't know what's up with that, but we had the meeting, we had the committee meeting, and since this was originated with the council, it would come back to the council first. We recommended that the proposal as is with, I think there were stylistic amendments.
I understand that, but do we need to add this to your agenda at this point in time?
Yes.
All right, so you make a motion to
I'll
do
make a
that.
motion to add that to the agenda.
Seconded by Counselor Hosmer. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Okay, so the clerk can add that to the agenda for that committee. All right, any other committee business tonight? Counselor Hamel?
Hold on.
Oh, you still, I'm sorry,
You gave me a lot, you know, so just
Okay.
bear with me.
my apologies.
That's all right. I had gotten an email from Director of Planning, Dean Trefethan, regarding committee reports on public safety, Fair Street, Core Street traffic problems and accidents. I'll give you a brief overview, and Dean can fill you in,
What
but
item are we on now?
we are on public safety, Fair Street, Court Street, traffic problems and accidents, 16B1.
Sixteen what?
B1. 16 committee reports. A is finance, B is public safety.
Oh, I can't find, I'm sorry, help me out here. Oh, way up here. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you said D. I can't tell the difference between B and D.
Okay. I'll try to enunciate better.
Good luck. All right, I'm sorry, I'm on the same page now.
Okay, because of the work that we're doing on Court Street now, there's going to be a regrade to, as I understand it, to, Wes. What did I say? That's Wes Anderson, who's responsible for that, and it was his email. My apologies. We're regrading Fair Street, which may, when we'll monitor it over time, and it may be that because of the regrade, that the accident problem that we once had won't be there anymore. So I'm going to let Wes, if you would, just give us a brief update on where we're at.
We basically regraded the Fair Street approach coming from the river and lifted it up a bit to improve the sight line. And we also changed some of the profile in regards to the curbing to improve the sight line. So we believe, other than going massive reconstruction of it, we believe we've improved it enough where the chances of accidents are dropping there. So we would like to take this off, give it a year or two to see what the history is underneath the new design and see what it looks like from there.
Is the left turn still going to be there, or has that been taken out?
That's presently what the plan is.
To leave it?
To leave the left turn there on Fair Street, the approach.
No, I mean, from Fair to Court.
Correct.
That's
Yes.
staying.
Yep,
That stays.
that stays.
And the idea would be, the idea would be that we remove this from the agenda, we monitor it for a couple of years, and see if there's an ongoing problem. And if there's not, we're taking care of it. If there is, we can put it back on the agenda.
Oh, is that a motion?
Yeah.
All right, Counselor Bounds moves to remove item 16B1 from the agenda for the Public Safety Committee.
You
Is there
got
a
the
second?
same problem with Bs and Ds that I do.
Counselor Lippman seconded it?
Well, I have a different suggestion on it.
Second, is that a second?
No.
No. So it was seconded over here then?
I'll second it, yes.
Counselor Hosmer seconds it. Discussion.
So we put some of the things that on item 23, where we just, so we don't lose things, and, 2 years from now is a lifetime away, if you will, in terms of making sure we don't lose the issue. I'd suggest moving it down into that section of our agenda, so it just doesn't fall off the face of the earth,
So you want to move it to 23?
whatever.
H
23
now?
Yep, H.
Would you
Move-
consider that to be a friendly amendment?
I got no vested interest. It's as friendly as you can get.
Is that a friendly amendment to the seconder as well? All right, so the motion has been changed to move that item to future agenda items, number H. Okay? Any further discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. Oh, you have discussion? I'm sorry.
Wes, I'm still not convinced that. Is that haunted? I'm still not convinced that the curbing, and it seems to have narrowed the lanes. If someone's turning right, they can't see the traffic going west because somebody's in that center lane that wants to turn left.
Right.
I'm still not convinced that I mean, I'll grant you we can move it, but I'm still not convinced that that solves the
It's
problem.
just a period of time, we just need to watch it and see what's happening, and then we can tweak it from there.
Okay.
So I thought we had discussed in the past, quite a while ago, that that was gonna be eliminated.
We have the ability to do it at any point. Because basically at that,
So you got tractor
basically,
trailers will be turning onto Fair Street, and that
Yeah.
vehicle is right in the way.
basically, we have the ability to basically take the paint off at any point, because we made the physical improvements much, and repaint it.
Well, and it's not possible for a truck to turn that corner going
Not if there's
to the
someone
right
that
Not if someone
can't.
and stay in their lane. There's no way.
That's why I thought we eliminated that in discussion before.
I think we had discussion about it, and we said we could take a look at it with the improvements that were made. I think the challenge is going to be if you don't have the left-hand turn lane there, you're either going to have traffic that's cutting through the parking lot of the auto parts place and then coming out just a little bit further, or they're going to be going down the side street just off of Fair Street, whose name escapes me, and coming out Bay Street. And that street, that little side street cut-through, is not meant for the volume of traffic that wants to zip down there to then get on Bay Street. So with the trees coming down, with the raising, with the curb, we can monitor it. It's a simple fix. If it's not working, we want to eliminate the left-hand turn there.
What about the house on the right? And that's always been a problem for viewing.
I think we took down a significant tree on that corner, though, that was there. We took that down early in the
Row of
project.
hedges is still there, though.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
Further discussion?
Oh,
All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. So that item has now been added to the future agenda items
Mr. Mayor,
list. Yes.
under land
And you
and,
have committee business.
under land and buildings, I'd like to schedule a meeting for July 22nd, which will be the second meeting of the month, at 6 PM for item 16D1, downtown parking garage. I was informed by Wes that you have an updated price for the garage for repairs and reconditioning, and we'll be discussing that, so.
So what day do you want to have it at?
July 22nd. Is 6 o'clock a good time, Wes? Need about an hour, that'll leave enough time, or do we don't need that much?
I think an hour's more than sufficient. It really depends on how many questions you've got on what's the cost and what we're planning to do with it.
Okay, then why don't we make it 6:15?
Okay, Counselor Hamel moves to schedule a meeting of the Land and Buildings Committee for July 22nd at 6:15 PM to discuss item number 1 on their agenda, the downtown parking garage. Is there a second to that motion? Counselor Bounds seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. Any other committee business?
Yes.
Counselor Bounds.
I want to take care of the last item on my committee reports now, and I want to schedule a schedule a meeting of the Government Operations and Ordinance Committee for the paid parking proposal for downtown, and I'd like to do that for the first Monday of August, to keep that on the agenda, and that is item 16C5. Or Roman numeral 5.
That would be August, what? Somebody got a calendar?
August 5th.
Talk about the first meeting night or the first, so the
Yeah.
first meeting night would be August 12th.
All right, what time?
We better schedule it at 6 and leave
6
an hour
o'clock.
for
All
this.
right, Counselor Bounds makes a motion to schedule a meeting of the Government Operations and Ordinances Committee for August 12th at 6 PM to take up item number 5, paid parking proposal for downtown. Is there a second? Someone? No one wants to meet that night? Counselor Haynes. Okay.
Can,
Counselor Haynes seconds the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. All right, any other committee business?
I'm done.
Still going?
I'm done.
You're done?
I'm done.
How about liaison reports? Any liaison reports?
I think I've given you the liaison reports in terms of what's come out of the planning board.
Anyone else? Okay, we're moving on then. Citizens' request to comment on current agenda items. This is the appropriate place in our agenda tonight for anyone who is in our audience who wishes to address the council on any matter that is on tonight's agenda. Anyone meet that description? All these people here. Mr. Wood.
Mr. Mayor, councilors, I'm not clear. I think you said the city council is going to be discussing the Colonial Theater tonight.
Well, it's not on the agenda,
Okay.
but yes, it will be discussed under budget deliberations.
All right, so there is an opportunity at that point to speak.
No, you can do it now.
Okay.
Thank
I received information from the city manager this afternoon as the chairperson of the TIF committee. We have not met, so I can't speak on behalf of the TIF committee, but my understanding is that part of the discussion this evening will be using TIF money to pay for the bond that's being requested or being discussed.
Will be discussed.
Will be discussed. The result of, if that is agreed upon by the city council, that those TIF funds would be used for that purpose, that means there really isn't any additional TIF funds that will be available probably for the next 14 years or so for downtown matters. My concern is that we are putting all of our eggs in one basket, and I would be concerned about doing that from the city's point of view. I've already mentioned earlier this evening 2 issues concerning parking, which is a major concern downtown, and I am anxious that we don't overlook the need to address that concern as well. So I am concerned as a citizen and a member of the TIF committee that we not commit all of those TIF funds to one project, and that we keep in mind that there are other things that we need to do as well.
Councilor Hamel has a question.
Just for a quick reply, all the eggs aren't in one basket, because we've used TIF funds for the Wild Trail, the Riverwalk, we used it for downtown over here, and now this is another piece of that for the Colonial. So it's just not one project. We got several out there that have been done using TIF funds, and there'll be more in the future too.
Well, according to the analysis that we were given, the actual funds available won't be there, at least for another 14 years.
You've got downtown development, there'll be more there.
Well, but if we had less money from the TIF going into the Colonial, then we would have additional money available now for assisting with the issue with parking. That's my concern.
Well, I understand, and I think we get your point. Understand also that that proposal that you're referring to is not before council at this minute. And so therefore, most of the people on the council are in the dark in terms of what's being proposed. Later on in the meeting tonight, the city manager is going to distribute to us his recommendation about how to fund the request. And we'll discuss it at that time, but we're kind of in the dark now in terms of.
Right, I understand that. That's why I was asking whether I should talk now or
Okay, no,
or
now
later.
it's fine, but I just
Okay.
want to point
But I'm
out
just-
that.
And I'm just saying, when you get to that point and you start discussing it, I'm not saying that we're opposed to the concept of using TIF funds for the Colonial Theater.
I understand that the city manager's, what he was looking at anyway, and I haven't seen his final recommendation either, is he was suggesting that a portion of the Colonial Theater project could be funded by assuming that the TIF tax base would grow at 2% per year over 20 years, and that it would be able to handle so much debt service because of that. So the obvious inference from that is if the tax base grows by more than 2%, that would be extra funds going into the TIF district that are not there now, or not anticipated.
Correct.
So obviously, those of us who are promoting the Colonial project, if you will, are assuming that, are predicting that this is going to be a catalyst for further development in the downtown area. We
Well,
can't guarantee that,
obviously.
but if it does, we would certainly predict that the growth would be, in a very short number of years, more than 2% a year.
But as part of that growth, we need to also keep in mind the downtown parking situation. So improving one doesn't necessarily mean we can't improve the other, and that's our
Counselor
concern.
Bounds is scheduled a committee meeting for the first meeting in March to start tackling that very issue.
Right, and in July, there's a meeting dealing with the downtown parking garage. So both of those issues are of great concern to us on the TIF committee. So anyway, that's our concerns, my concerns, I should say, not ours, mine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to address the council tonight on a matter that is on tonight's agenda? Mrs. Shore.
Good evening. Tara Shore, Ward 4. Just a matter of process, just so I understand. I've learned a lot about local government in the last month and a half, so thank you. But just when you get to the point in regards to speaking about the historic overlay district, and you'll be discussing it, do we then have the opportunity to ask questions at that time, or?
Without the unanimous consent of the council.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll just-
Sometimes it's up to the council. Sometimes the council wishes to get additional input from somebody in the audience that they think could add to the conversation. But as a matter of back and forth or
Sure.
conversation, no.
Okay. And you will let us know that if you have a question for us, is that what the, okay, all right. I appreciate that.
I'll just put in my 2 cents on that, because we've actually had 2 committee meetings on this. One because we didn't have enough time to begin with, and 2, we were trying to rough out a rough draft. The second meeting was, we actually got out the kind of rough draft for the council's consideration. So it would be my view that if somebody wanted to ask a question or get some input, that would be appropriate this time, because what the committee is recommending is that we send it now to the planning board, which is where it has to go before you can adopt that kind of the ordinance.
So I'm not clear what you're suggesting.
I'm suggesting that, in my view, since we're going to be discussing this, the full council for the first time, that we listen to questions that may be asked by the general public. Or
That's
get
their
input.
opportunity to do that right now.
Okay.
I guess my concern might be, not such a concern, but my thought process is that Dean had offered some options to add to it, and I know that the counselors may have some things to add to it, and those would all be brand new to any of us listening, and we may have questions about that, so just,
Well, keep in
that's the thought.
mind, please, that this is far from a final process at this
Right.
point in time. That this is, the motion that will be made tonight will be to refer this to the planning board, which will also hold a public hearing
Right,
and
okay.
accept public input. Then it's going to come back to the city council, which has the option of holding yet another public hearing. So we're a long way from not accepting any more public comment on the general issue.
Okay, I just wanted to check on process, thank
I'm
you.
just trying to keep it as orderly tonight as possible.
Yep, perfect,
We have a
thank you so
long
much.
agenda.
I know, I'm sorry we added to it, sorry.
See, I saw Mr. Karagianis back there, I think, yes.
Good evening, Mayor and councilors. My name is Peter Karagianis. I'm on the Board of Directors for the Belknap Mill Association Society. Just would like to ask for your support on the request for the $100,000 for the renovation project. The mill has gone through many savings in the 70s, and even as close as 5 years ago, we had a bump in the road. But the Board of Directors, in the past 5 years, has put the mill on a very good footing. We're moving ahead. We have a great plan for restoration and making it a showplace. I know there are a lot of, I appreciate that you folks have a lot on your plate with all the things going on. And I believe, I would hope that we can do the mill and the Colonial. There's been mention of other big financial projects as well. But I would request that you take our request in consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay. We're on to the city manager's report. Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will be very brief because I know these folks didn't come out to hear me or discuss my topics tonight, so that's okay. Road construction, we continue to be very busy, so I'm going to focus on a general statement. Right around the 4th of July holiday, our goal is to be out of the main travel ways and focusing on some work in some of the traffic signal intersections for the pedestrian crossings to start some of the upgrades there with the ADA compliant, and we're working on 4 different intersections there. Court Street, if the weather cooperates this week with Phase 1, we will be wrapping up the sidewalks. That's the good news. Once we get through 4th of July, we'll be back in Court Street starting what is known as Phase 2, which runs from Fair Street down towards the Main Street intersection. The Water Department has got another this week and all of next week, probably with work on Messer Street that they're doing right now. They will then turn that over to Public Works, and we will be doing storm drains and reclaiming the road there. We will be probably through on Messer Street sometime in August. And again, we are continuing work in Lakeport Square, down Union Ave, toward Stark Street. Again, we're going to try to be out of there around the 4th of July holiday, working on some other stuff, and then back in there afterwards. So we continue to be very busy. One other interesting thing that needs to happen with Liberty Utilities on Court Street, and this is in conjunction with the bridge replacement, which is set for, over the Durkee Brook, which is set for next spring, is Liberty needs to replace about 500 foot of pipe that they need to go underneath and bore underneath the bridge, existing bridge as it is there. And that piping will need to be constructed on site so that it can go in one constructed piece. So at some point in July, as the schedules firm up, they will actually be constructing that 500 foot of pipe in the center turn lane. So we will have both travel lanes open. There will be some minor detours because you can't drive over, I believe it's a 20-inch main that they're putting in. So unless you've got a great SUV or are feeling adventurous, you're probably not going to want to drive over a 20-inch pipe. So we will have some minor detours just to get into certain curb cuts. But that is what is happening with Liberty Utilities. We've got the irrigation work ongoing over at Memorial Park and then moving to Wyatt Park, and that's expected to be wrapped up by the end of this month. We also have the railing anticipated to be in with Busby down here on the Riverwalk at the far end of the City Hall parking lot, is scheduled to be completed by the end of this month as well. And then we've awarded the bid and modified the scope of work a little bit for Bond Beach, and that is ready to go probably just because of the contractor's schedule and busyness towards the end of the season. So I will, and the last thing is the Pearly Pond. Councilor Cheney, Councilor Hosmer, some members of the Alan Gauthier from the Pearly family, and I have been out there with some staff as well as a representative from Riss-Frost Shumway, an engineer. Looked at the pond. That engineer followed up with the Department of Environmental Services at the state to talk about what would be the next step about doing some cutting, possibly dredging. How do we go forward? There's a little bit of pushback from the state. Their take on it is that ponds run their natural cycles and sometimes fill in and evolve into different, but they agreed that this was not under the Shoreline Protection Act and that the city had the right to move forward and request a cut in a dredge permit for that pond because some minimal amount of dredging along the shore is going to be recommended. So the engineer from Riss-Frost Shumway got back to me and forwarded me the response of the state not being too excited but not saying no. I gave the go-ahead for that engineer to go ahead and complete the work and submit the application because the only way we're going to know what the state says is by doing that work and following the application. So that's the process where we are at right now. Along with that, our staff is taking care of some bittersweet and some invasive species that's growing in some of the tree line area around the property. And Parks and Facilities is also going to be engaging the services of an arborist to come in and do some of the dead limbing of the tree separate from the dredge. So those two projects are going to be in the works, if at least done with our staff and not over there already. But the arborist will be contracted separately, and we'll await the report back from the engineer on the DES and what the state says on Pearly Pond. So happy to take any questions on those before I move on to the economic development report.
Any questions on the project status report? Go ahead.
Very briefly, you know that unemployment continues to be low. I know a lot of our seasonal employers got a big boost when some of their temporary workers coming in from foreign countries arrived a few weeks back to be here just in time for summertime, so that's a boost. And our CPIU number for the month of May came in at 1.8%, so 5 months through the year, our inflation number, which is tied to our tax cap formula, is at 1.8%. And I'll take any questions you may have on that or anything else.
Any questions or comments for the manager? Counselor Hamel.
Scott, when is the, with all the digging that's going on in Court Street, are we gonna let that settle for a year and do, is the final paving gonna be done when the whole project is done?
That's the intent right now, is to do the wearing course on Phase 1, come through this fall, do the wearing course on Phase 2, and then come back next spring for 2 or 3 days and do the entire run of it with one final paving course.
Okay. So I'm sure that's gonna require a lot of settling with all the digging that's
Yeah,
been
so
going on.
that's the plan, is to get 2 of the base courses down. And again, I think we're doing a total of, is it 5 inches? 5.5 inches. So along with this reconstruction and doing complete streets, we are really putting a significant base that'll handle the volume and the truck traffic there. So we're going to get a good bang for our buck on this project.
Yeah, also, do you think 3 major projects like this is a little much for what's going on? I mean, on Union Avenue, I mean, you see them still doing test pits, you know, further down to see what's there. I mean, it doesn't look like that whole design is completed yet. So, I mean, are we doing too much?
No, I don't think we are. I mean, there's a lot going on, but I think we're organized in some areas. What we're finding, though, is being an older city and sometimes infrastructure going in, not master planned for how you might look at it today comprehensively. So in the case of Union Ave down in Lakeport, we actually need the gas company to move at their cost about 500 feet of gas line, if I'm not mistaken, to the other side of the street, so that when we put in the size piping that we need for the stormwater down there to handle all those tie-ins and handle it properly and preserve the work that we're putting into the retaining wall that runs along there, that's a component of it. So sometimes it looks like there's things, you know, happening on the fly, but that's something that was identified, and that's why some of those test pits are being done. It's in conjunction with the gas line moving, which is something different, but that's going to allow us to properly do our work to preserve the investment that we're putting into that stretch of road going forward.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Okay, we're going to move on to new business. First item of new business tonight is support for repair and rehabilitation work at the historic Belknap Mill. That is on page 27 of your packet. And the proposal here is to allocate $100,000 of current contingency funds. Now, clarify here, make sure everybody's on the same page. We're not talking about next year's budget. We're talking about this year, now. All right, so this proposal is to take $100,000 out of contingency and donate it to the Belknap Mill for their restoration work. And that $100,000 is in contingency at this moment because it is unappropriated money from the sale of the Lakeport property to the Irwin Company. That was a total of $500,000 and change, $300,000 of which went to the education payroll stabilization account, and this is $100,000 that is currently unaccounted for, other than it's in contingency. So a motion would be in order to authorize the transfer of $100,000 from the non-departmental contingency account to the Belknap Mill Society. Motion made by Councilor Hosmer, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Discussion.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, and
Sure.
Thank you very much. I just want to go on the record. I'm a member of the Belknap Mill Society Board of Directors, but that's, hopefully it's not a conflict. If someone sees a conflict there and me voting on this, I would appreciate you letting me know, but I don't see one. Nonetheless, having joined the board a couple of years ago, and I think Mr. Karagianis characterized what has gone on over the past couple of years. This board and this mill really is, it's an extraordinary group of people, and the mills really has an extraordinary history in what it represents for this city. not only for our industrial past, but also what it represents for our future going forward. What has impressed me the most with the mill is the quality of the board membership, the plan going forward, so it remains a beautiful, iconic structure within the city, and also its plan for financial viability going forward. This capital campaign that was started has a goal, and an ambitious goal, of $1.5 million. Through an awful lot of hard work, we stand at about $900,000 raised right now, which is a significant sum of money and certainly a long way from where this mill was just a few short years ago. This money, if the contribution is made from the city to the Belknap Mill, would go into a program that it's not just a shovel-ready project. It's in the midst of renovation work as we speak. This money will be deployed immediately to shore up the exterior of the building before we get into the winter months again, which would help us to maximize the investment made previously in a new heating system, a new boiler system, so we can maximize efficiencies with the boiler system, but also making sure that we don't lose heat through the windows and throughout the building. It will also go towards one of its primary revenue spaces, which is the third floor, which I know we've all had an opportunity to go there and for meetings, maybe for celebrations, maybe for political type events. It is truly one of the best places in the city to have a function, and I think represents the mill very, very well. So this money will immediately be deployed for desperately needed renovations there, so it can continue to be an essential part of the viability, the financial viability of the mill going forward. So I appreciate all the time that fellow councilors have been willing to spend with me speaking about this project, and certainly I hope we have an opportunity to support this very important project and really poise the city for continued growth and exciting times ahead. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councilor Lippman?
So I make the observation that there's a lot going on right now in the community about heritage and history preservation. We've got the church issue in front of us in the city. We had the Indian statute in front of us recently. We've had the Belknap Mill in front of us, and we have the Colonial Theater in front of us. And you know, to a number of our constituents, not everybody, the heritage is an important part of being a part of the community. Fortunately, you know, speaking from the finance chair perspective, that we're in a position, I think, to undertake a number of different initiatives while maintaining our 14-year track record of staying within the tax cap. And I'd prefer to do this as a series of pledges, but having talked to Councilor Hosmer this evening about the fact that things are shovel-ready, if you will, and ready to go, that I would go along with supporting this.
Councilor Hamel?
I'd just like to say, I remember 5 years ago, as Mr. Caragiani, who said that the group came to the city and asked us to buy the building. And at that time, the council, I don't remember if it was a actual motion or just a consensus of the council, but we decided that we didn't want the building. I think during that time, up to now, they've, you could say, got their act together, or they have a board that's really dedicated and have been working hard, and we've seen a lot of improvements over there, and they seem to continue to want to do that. So I'm going to be in favor of this tonight, whether I can go either way, whether it's you do it for, 25 for 4 years, 50 for 2 years, or if you do the 100, I could do that. So I'm going to support it whatever way the majority of the council decides.
Anyone else? Councilor Bounds?
Well, I support funding this, funding the Belknap Mill for the $100,000. I think the numbers are there for us to do it this year. It's not going to come out of next year's budget. And we're going to be able to do this, and hopefully we'll be able to find a way to do the Colonial Theater. I think that the Belknap Mill and the Colonial Theater can work beautifully together in terms of what future there is for the downtown, and there's so much promise. So, as I understand it, and we would be dealing with successive councils for successful pledges, and I'm not sure what's going to happen or how the coin's going to flip. I don't know if we can bind future councils to an amount, but I'm saying we've got the ability to do it now. We've got, it's an important project. Nobody can disagree with that. And it can be so symbiotic with what's going on with the Colonial Theater that I'm in support of this project.
Anyone else? Counselor Haynes?
And yes, I thank you.
I know your microphone is live tonight.
Just that I support Councilor Barnes. Let's just do it.
Anyone else? Thank you for your brevity, Counsel. All right, everybody understand the motion? $100,000 donation to the Belknap Mill coming out of contingency. All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, it passes unanimously, and congratulations to the mill people. You can say 2 words.
I just want to say thank you so very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think the mayor has already told Andrew and I that we talk too much. Thank you.
I'm just saving time for myself later on. All right, second item of new business tonight is a request to schedule not 1, but 4 public hearings on July 8th. Well, exciting night that will be. During the regular city council for the consideration of sponsorship of community development block grants. Okay, you have that memorandum on page 28 of your packet. And we have a whole bunch of motions here. What happened to the city manager?
Quit.
That's for
City
finance?
manager had to step out for a few minutes.
Okay. Can you, I'm assuming that these 4 requests, there's actually 3 requests. One of them has 2 motions to it.
That's correct.
So if you could refresh our memory, if you recall, each community entity has the ability to sponsor so many block grant applications during a calendar year for a total of so many dollars, as I recall.
That's correct also.
All right, so where do these 3, do you know, fall within our allotment? Because I know there's different categories.
I don't have that information right in front of me at this
Okay.
point.
I understand.
So Mayor, can we pass on this item
Why
to
don't
the
we
mayor?
Yeah, I think,
Go on to the next.
I'd like to, we can come back to this, if you
I
will,
agree.
with, when the city manager returns, so he can answer those questions. All right, so let's put that aside for the moment and go on to, everyone's favorite every year. A request to sign the unlicensed dog warrant for 2019. Okay, that's on page 30. A motion be in order to issue the warrant as presented for all the 2019 unlicensed dogs. A warrant for unlicensed dogs.
I'll make that.
Do we have to sign that tonight? Do you have that?
Yes,
Counselor?
It's gone around.
Like
somewhere.
all of you have,
It's already been around.
all of you have to, you've already signed it.
I
We
have.
haven't even passed it yet. Everybody's signed it. All right.
They're afraid of me.
Counselor Hamel, do you make that motion?
I will make
Is there
that
a second, please?
Lock them up.
Second somewhere?
Right here.
No one wants to go on record as being
I was gonna bark in the.
against. All right. Second from Counselor Lippman. Any discussion? All those in favor of signing the dog warrant, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative. You're brave people. Thank you. Okay. We're on to item D, request for a building permit on a private road for 195 Eastman Shore Road North. That's been a busy place lately. That's on page 31 of your packet and has to do with, so is anyone prepared to discuss that? Wes, did you?
Dean.
Dean? Okay, sorry.
Eastman Shore Road North is an unaccepted road, although the city has been doing some limited maintenance out there. It is also one of the roads on the as-is list that was, that the council considered a few weeks ago. We have no objections to granting a building permit out there. The owner of the property understands the process that they need to go through and the reasons that they need to do this. And they're in the process of getting their waiver of liability as well.
Okay. Motion being ordered to approve the building permit for 195 Eastman Shore Road North as requested, contingent upon receiving all permits required by the city. Is there a motion? Counselor Bounds makes that motion. Is there a second? Counselor Lippman is a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in affirmative, that motion carries. And with the return of the city manager, we're going to go back to item B. And this has to do with the community development block grants. And the question was, can you update us on where our sponsorship quota is for the various categories?
Yes, I can. So there's two separate pots of money with CDBG. One is for the rehabbing and the development or redevelopment of properties. The other one is tied into economic development. So I'm not aware of any other folks looking for dollars in this pot, which is the property redevelopment. So this would be using it for community, Lakes Region
Our
community
allocation
developers.
is what?
$500,000. But there's also an opportunity to request funds through the county and other entities as well. So this would be utilizing the city's allocation for this particular.
Don't we have 3 requests here?
No, it's all the same. It's just 4 public hearings for the same one. You have to do the anti-displacement.
So they're all going to share $500,000?
It's all one project.
It's one project there.
It's all one project.
So navigating recovery is part of this project?
That's 191.
That's an update. That public hearing is an update. At the same time, we're doing the CBDG money
So
for
there's
Lakes
only
Region
one
community developers.
CDBG.
There's only one CDBG. The 2 updates that are part of this right now are the 2 projects that we already approved last year.
Okay.
All right, so we're just combining CBDG, we're calling it CBDG night.
So we're not holding a public hearing on those last 2?
We are holding public hearings as an update, as required with the project. We're required to give a status update. So we're funding one amount of money for $500,000 for a rehab project. We're doing the
Previous 2 we already
Anti-Displacement Act.
sponsored.
The other 2 have already got the money. It's been awarded through governor and council, and you see the work going on those 2 buildings on Court Street as we speak.
Right.
We're just tying in 2 additional public hearings as is required to do an update on those projects.
Everybody got that? All right, there's a long list of public motions here. So if there are no questions at this point, we'll get right to those. Okay. Motion be in order to schedule a public hearing on July 8th, 2019 during the regular city council meeting regarding a proposed application to the Community Development Finance Authority for up to $250,000 for Lakes Region Community I thought you said they already have the money.
No. The first one is for a new $250,000 to do the project on Elm Street.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And then the second one, the anti-displacement, goes with that project. Number
This is the
3,
community,
this is another project that the Lakes Region Community Developers is doing in addition to the one they're already doing on
I'm
Court Street.
sorry. I'll get this straight eventually. All right. So Lakes Region Community Developers wants to help us to sponsor a $250,000 grant to renovate a 4-unit building located at 87 Elm Street in Laconia. The building provides families coming from homelessness with transitional housing to learn skills and access educational and career opportunities to get their lives back on track. The building needs several upgrades. This is all in the motion?
Yeah.
Including roof replacements, a new fire escape, 4 new natural gas furnaces, some window and door replacements, and a major remodel of one of the units. In addition, Community Developers is considering tearing down an old garage to provide additional parking and landscape areas for tenants and installing security cameras. Another property is in great Another property is in great need of significant rehab. 21 Winter Street, Unit 5, was minimally rehabbed 25 years ago. I've never read a motion like this before.
Just read it, Mayor. We'll get through it.
A very long-term tenant just passed away, and a unit needs to be completely rehabbed, kitchen, bath, windows, and walls. Someone care to make that motion?
I'll make it.
Counselor Hamel, is there a second?
I'll second it. Can I
Counselor
read it
Bounds.
again?
You want me to read it again? All right, all those in favor of scheduling this public hearing, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. All right, next, a motion will be in order to schedule a public hearing on July 8, 2019, during the regular city council meeting regarding the residential anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan for the proposed Lakes Region Community Developers CDBG project. Councilor Hosmer makes that motion, seconded by Councilor Bounds. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Next. Motion is ordered to schedule a public hearing on July 8, 2019 during the regular city council meeting regarding the progress on Lakes Region Community Developers CDBG project acquisition of 191 and 193 Court Street, the property to be relocated offices and neighborhood center for LRCD, known to all of us as Walters Market. Motion by Councilor Hosmer, seconded by Councilor Bounds. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. And finally, move to schedule a public hearing on July 8, 2019 during the regular city council meeting regarding the progress on navigating recovery of the Lakes Region's Community Block Grant Project acquisition and renovation of 102 Court Street, the property to be relocated offices and recovery service center for navigating recovery. Councilor Hosmer makes that motion. Councilor Bounds seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor of scheduling that hearing, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we are down to item E. That is the first reading of ordinance 25-21.1 Performance Zoning Overlay District. And that packet is on page 32, or memorandum is on page 32 of your packet. And who's going to explain this? Dean?
In this implementation, performance zoning was recommended by the Master Plan Steering Committee and has been before the Planning Board for several months. They held 3 different public hearings. We kept having some revisions to the language. The main thrust of the performance zoning is to allow a developer to come into the city with a significant development and to be alleviated of some of the standard zoning requirements. Specifically, there are 5 or 6, and let me see if I can get these real quick here. I don't want people to think that it's every single zoning regulation, because it's not. I can't find it right now. Oh, there we are. The things that the planning board, if this was to be approved, the things that the planning board could grant conditional use for is uses, density, setbacks, signs, buffers, building heights, lot sizes, lot dimensions, and parking requirements. Every other zoning regulation would still apply, but for those.
Including environmental regulations.
Environmental regulations, historic district, if that was approved, wetland setbacks, steep slopes, et cetera, et cetera. There are, as you know, there are dozens and dozens of regulations in our zoning ordinance, and they would still be in effect and not be allowed to be bypassed. The idea here is to try to get some traction and to give us a little bit of a competitive edge in the state.
And this would apply where?
The performance zoning is, as a proposed right now, would apply in the new urban commercial district that hopefully you will be approving later on tonight, and also in the state school property and a few parcels that are immediately adjacent to the school property, state school property.
Thank you. So what I would add to that as this proposal, for the sake of the council and for our audience, this proposal came out of the steering committee that's comprised of planning board members, city council members, and a couple of citizen representatives, and councilors Bounds and Lippman and myself serve on that committee, and had a hand in crafting this legislation, if you will. And what this legislation does, in layman's terms, is allow, in certain parts of the city, and in this case, right now limited to two, the new commercial zone that we're talking about later tonight, and the state school property and local environs up there, a couple parcels immediately adjacent to that property. It would allow a developer with a significant project in mind. This is not aimed at somebody wanting to build a shed or something or other in their backyard. We're talking about significant projects. It would allow a developer to come in to the city, to the planning department and the planning board with plans, significant plans to develop a certain piece of property that meets theoretically the city's goals as outlined in the new master plan. And if that plan runs amok, if you will, of specific regulations for that zone in terms of the kinds of things that Dean talked about, density, height, setbacks, that sort of thing, normally the developer would be required to go to the zoning board, to get a variance or variances for those considerations. But this would allow the planning board at its discretion to say, yes, this is a project that we really want and need in the city of Laconia, and therefore we're going to waive all the requirements in those specific areas so that you can build it and avoid all the red tape. That's as simple as I can put it in layman's terms. Okay? Any questions from the council or whatnot before we get to motions? Councilor Bounds?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but don't we have an opportunity to set this for a public hearing?
That's a motion before us.
Is that the motion that we're going to consider?
Yes, we don't have to do it because the planning board held more than one hearing apparently, but the second motion before you tonight is to schedule a public hearing. If you don't want that public hearing, you can just vote that motion down.
Okay, all right, because I want the public hearing, and I didn't understand that we were scheduling.
That's a shock.
Okay.
We're correcting you.
Okay.
Okay.
I've had my input, thank you.
You bet. All right, first motion would be in order to move to waive a reading of this ordinance tonight in its entirety and to read tonight by title only. Councilor Hosmer makes that motion, seconded by Councilor Hamel. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of title only, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Next up is a motion to move the first reading of ordinance 2019-235-21.1, amending Chapter 235 of zoning, Article 4, overlay districts to add a new section referred to as 235-21.1, performance zoning overlay district and accompanying maps. Councilor Bounds, would you like to make that motion?
I surely would.
All right, is there a second? Councilor Lippman, would you second that motion? All right, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor of adopting this ordinance on first reading, please raise a hand. Thank you. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. And finally, motion be in order to schedule a public hearing on this issue on July 8th, 2019 during the regular city council meeting to gather public input prior to adoption. Councilor Bounds?
I'll make that motion.
It's your baby, thank you. And second, Councilor Haynes seconds that motion. Any discussion about holding a public hearing? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, last item of new business tonight is a first reading of Resolution 2019-18 relative to the fiscal year 2019 proposed year-end fiscal carry-forwards. That item starts on page 35 of your agenda, and for the next 6 or 8 pages, actually it's 4, I guess, there is a list of all the carry-forwards from the 2019 budget year to the 2020 year as proposed by the administration. Okay?
Mr. Mayor,
So, any discussion of any of these individual items?
I'm just curious. I stumbled across code enforcement of $1,000 for weed watchers. And I was hoping somebody could tell me.
That's the boat ramp.
That's the boat ramp
I
for
think that actually should
invasive
be,
species.
that should actually be
Oh.
Conservation Commission instead of Code Enforcement.
Ah,
So we will correct,
Aquatic invasive species.
we will correct that administratively.
It's a good job if you want it.
no, I'm fine.
All right, any other comments about?
I like the title, but
I was hoping they could swing by the house and,
It'd be great to have a name tag on it, that said, or a business card, weed watcher. Okay, any questions before we get to motions?
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Yes.
So these are, what they're meant to be is projects or capital items that just aren't quite completed. We still need to do them, and that's why we want to carry the funds over. You're not seeing line items in here like salaries or unexpended health insurance. These are kind of a worst-case scenario number as we want to capture them before the fiscal year ends. There may be some bills and some payables that are in transition, so the final numbers may not be exactly here, but these are how we know them as today, as they settle out when we close the books on the end of this fiscal year.
Okay, a motion be in order to read this resolution, which is number 18 tonight, and it's to waive reading of Resolution 18 in its entirety and to read tonight by title only. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion. Counselor Cheney seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. And then to move, a motion would be in order to approve Resolution 2019-18 relative to the fiscal year 19 proposed year-end fiscal carry-forwards as outlined. Counselor Hauser makes that motion. Counselor Haynes seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor of the carry-forwards, please raise a hand.
Just a procedural question before we do.
Okay, sorry.
So I think what you're saying to us is that you'll come back with a specific actual number before we close the budget?
We will finalize. It won't be greater than these numbers, when there might be a few, monies that we've encumbered or some invoices that might be paid between now and the close of the fiscal year. So this would kind of be a not to exceed for each line item. If anything, the numbers may be a little lower, but we can give you a final reconciliation once we close the books on the fiscal year.
Okay, we ready to vote?
Yes.
Hello, so we're approving resolution number 18. All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we're on to unfinished business. I have a long agenda there. And the first item per the adjustment that was made at the beginning of our meeting is general budget discussion. And for our audience, I will advise that this is a portion of the meeting or a meeting that we hold every year about this time. The council has spent countless hours over the last 2 months listening to budget presentations from the various departments. And tonight is the opportunity for the councilors to meet and discuss and agree upon any adjustments they want to make before we get to the final adoption of that budget. And do we have a handout coming from?
Coming right around as we speak, Mr. Mayor.
I'm trying to get a handle on
Right,
this.
and I have a handout as well regarding the Colonial Theater, which I will pass out.
So are we looking at 3 handouts here?
So we'll have some shuffling of paper here before, how many are there?
There's one, I've got yours, Mayor, right
Oh,
here.
you got mine,
Just
all right.
pass these out.
So there's 2 different items?
Yep.
So we're looking at 2 different handouts, is that right?
That's that one.
One of each. Yep.
Thank you.
got one. so.
You already got one. Andrew, thank you, Mayor. Clerk. You already got Okay. So where is the stuff that you gave me? I already buried it. Here. And here. All right, so the first sheet that has 2 pages to it are the suggestions that have been made to date, correct?
The one that's titled Staff Report, June 19th, yes.
All right, so that 2-page memorandum there is the requests that we were aware of, or the city manager was aware of, for changes to the budget as of the printing of this document.
And there are a couple of extra ones in there, Mr. Mayor, if you'd like me to run through it quickly.
Yeah. A couple of extra ones, all right, let me get to that in a second.
Okay.
All right, then the second sheet has to do with the Colonial Theater, which we'll get to in a minute, okay? And the city manager's proposal for the funding of the request that's being made tonight. So, this is the way I'd like to proceed with the council's indulgence on this, is because the Colonial Theater project, first of all, I'm going to recognize the city manager to explain the items on this that haven't been discussed at the council meeting. Then the second thing we'll do is I'll ask if any member of the council tonight, with the exception of the Colonial Theater project, wishes to put anything else on the table in terms of a budget adjustment. So we'll note, we can add that then. And then because the Colonial is such a big number, the next thing I would like to do is get into the Colonial presentation itself and get that discussion underway. And then we'll come back to these individual items and see. Now, typically what we do, councilors, to remind you, tonight is not a vote to approve the budget. Tonight is to try to reach consensus as to what items we would like to see adjusted in the budget that was proposed to us, okay? So typically what we do at the end of this meeting by informal votes, we come to a consensus about which items we want to have added to the budget, okay? And by consensus, I mean, you know, usually it's unanimous, but if there's one person objecting or two or something or other, we would probably still put that on the agenda because it would pass on final vote. So then the city manager will come away from tonight's meeting with the adjustments that we would like to see make, and he'll make those and then come back to us on July 8th with the final budget, correct?
I will bring you one resolution to substitute in the whole, which will take all of your consensus items and move it into the budget with one vote, and then you can take that document and still offer amendments up to it if there are any. But that's the easiest way to get everything in, simplest, and it gives us a chance to do the math and make sure we're accurate when we bring those changes to you.
Right. So we would have the budget before us in final form on July 8th. We don't necessarily have to pass it that night. If we don't want to, we could hold off till July 22nd at the latest date to approve the budget, okay? All right, so Mr. Myers, explain to us what's been added here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the first couple of these you've heard before in some way, shape, or form. So I'm on the document that says Staff Report, June 19. We've separated them out by Amendment 1, but most of the first ones I'll run through here apply to the general fund. So going into the solid waste budget, it was shared with you that we're going to stop swapping paper with Guilford as it were, once Guilford opens its transfer station, because only the commercial haulers will be coming in, and rather than us billing and collecting money and then billing Guilford for the difference, it's haulers that we already bill, and it just makes sense to collect the money from the haulers and pay to dispose of those through our tipping fees. So those three amendments is to decrease revenues by $26,137, ties into the $5 less per load we're receiving from Guilford visitors to the transfer station, increasing the revenue by 163,840. That ties into the added revenue we're going to be collecting for the Guilford waste, and also a proposal that'll come to you that I mentioned a few meetings ago for a January 1 rate increase just for the commercial haulers of $4 a ton. So you're not voting on that tonight, but that's where the number is, to go from $90 to $94 a ton on the commercial haulers. And that's the first rate increase we'll be proposing since 2013. So that rate has been steady. And then the third component, the added increase of the expenses, since we're collecting the revenue for the trash, we'll pay the tipping fee to get rid of it. So all of that basically nets out to impacting the solid waste budget by $428. We're collecting the money and we're keeping it, and now we need to spend to get rid of that extra tonnage we're collecting. That's what that amendment number 1 boils down to.
Is that a positive 428?
Yes. Yep. The second amendment deals with a request that Councilor Bounds made, was to add some additional staffing to the land use departments for several areas. Number 1, just regular property maintenance, but also if we're going to be enacting some sort of a short-term rental, looking into some of the updates with the master plan, et cetera. So Dean Trefethen, our planning director, and I discussed it. We really feel for the best bang for the buck is to increase the hours of a part-time person to full-time, and also change the job description so that they can work in a number of areas that benefit the subjects that I just mentioned to it. So the two numbers there is it's adding $41,472 for bringing a part-time position to full-time with full benefits. And then just as a placeholder, we had talked about adding a fee for folks who registered in the short-term rentals, and nothing more than saying we would have 100 people come in and apply at $100 a piece. So that number's not fixed, but it goes in as a revenue because we know that we would be collecting something, and we felt that that was a conservative number.
So that's a negative $31,000 and
Correct.
change?
Yep.
Where will that money come from?
It all comes out on the last page, I promise you, so in the wash, so to speak.
We're all looking forward to page 3.
Number 3 is something that just changed through the new hiring of a Parks Recreation Director after Kevin Dunleavy had given notice, so just in numbers that hadn't changed until after the fact. That's just a reflection of salaries, retirement system contributions, any Social Security, that type of stuff, a reduction of $15,900 across several areas of salary-related items for recreation and facilities. To make this all come together, we've also increased, because we're going to be projected to be about $100,000 over on our motor vehicle registration revenues for this year. We've added $16,000 to motor vehicle revenue. So if you jump ahead to the back page and you go down underneath number 11 where it says in bold fiscal impact, the net impact of all of those amendments to date is 0. So the revenue coming in is offset by the expense. So there's no impact to the amount that we're raising by taxes. There's no impact to the proposed tax rate. It's just we've got some more appropriations, but they're being offset by additional non-property tax revenue.
Okay, first question then, is there anything that's not on this list that any of the counselors thought should be before tonight? Everything you wanted or proposed accounted for here?
I got what I want.
And I still have a couple more to go through with the general fund, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we know that the Senate and the House and the legislature have come to an agreement on committee of conference on the budget. Those votes are happening on Thursday. In all likelihood, it appears that there's support in both chambers to pass those. What the governor will do with it is remaining to be seen, whether budget passes, whether we get a continuing resolution. Regardless of at what point in the year we get a budget, there's two components that impact Laconia that came out of this committee of conference that there's strong likelihood will remain in whatever final budget is adopted. So on number 5, on your second page, there is a proposal to reinstitute a form of revenue sharing. It's not the same form of revenue sharing that was suspended by the legislature in 2009. There's a different formula, but it's revenue sharing for 2 years. And each of those 2 years, Laconia on the city side of the budget would receive $414,000. I'm not counting on it, but it's a likelihood that's going to remain in the budget. So what I would ask that you include in the amendment is that we recognize $414,000 in revenue, and we add an appropriation of $414,000 into contingency. And it's one of those things, if the money doesn't materialize, we don't spend it out of the contingency, and no harm, no foul, so to speak. That would save us from, if the budget does get approved at the state level after we've adopted our budget, of coming back and having to amend our budget for something that we feel is going to be there. But again, we're not spending it until we know it materializes, so that's more of a, a housekeeping wash, if you will. Similar item right below that is additional monies coming through the education stabilization account. These would be school dollars, and the schools, through the formula, would be anticipating to get a little over $430,000. I spoke with the school business administrator today, and knowing that the city council only has bottom line authority over the school budget, I shared with her what I was proposing on the city side, and she said, please, yes, let them know that our intent would be to acknowledge it as a miscellaneous revenue and put it in a school contingency account, and if that money doesn't materialize, they obviously wouldn't be spending it. She went on additionally to tell me that I could share with you that if this $430,000 did materialize, the amount of transfers that she had spoken of out of the reserve accounts would not be requested by the schools going forward. So again, it's a placeholder. We feel comfortable that this is not the deal breaker in the budget and probably will stay in there in some way, shape, or form. So again, no impact. If the money doesn't come, it doesn't get spent. And then finally, under number 7, knowing that we haven't come to any kind of understanding yet on whether or not there would be an implementation of a paid parking program, just knowing the timing of where we are in the year and implementation, again, it's more of a placeholder to put $60,000 in the contingency line item for potential parking enforcement and salary, wages, benefits, and also $60,000 in an expense side to cover the cost of permits and, I'm sorry, the expense side would be the cost of the permits and the salary, $60,000 in revenue for charging for the permits. So again, a placeholder. If nothing went forward on it, we don't use it. If we implement any kind of a parking program in the downtown halfway through the year, 3/4 of the way through the year, we would only use the proportionate amount. That amount certainly would not cover any type of major kiosk purchase to cover the downtown if that was the intent of the council. But that's what that $60,000 is, only if there is some kind of a paid parking program that we have a way to implement it, recognize the revenue, recognize the expense. And again, that's $60,000 on both sides of the ledger, wash each other out. So those would be the entire extent of the amendments to the general fund that Glenn would craft and bring to you that you could move in with one vote in 2 weeks, and then you still would have the ability to amend the budget beyond that. Any questions on that part of it? All right, quickly on the other ones, because I think these are pretty straightforward. We've identified one additional grant that the fire department is going to receive for the reprogramming the radios to go into the interoperability with state compliance, and that's $5,000. So we just want to add that to the grants amount so we don't have to come through and do public hearings on that. We already spoke about the sanitary sewer account, looking to fund some of the larger long-term projects through debt service rather than cash. So we'd be amending that to reduce some cash. You can see by $725,000 and cover the first year of interest on the bond payment by $25,000. So that's a net reduction in the overall sewer budget in the amount of $700,000. The water department, when Seth was here, spoke of his need to adjust his revenue and how they did some of the capital projects. So we reflected the revised water commission budget. And then the last one on number 11 is the additional partial year's interest on the DPW truck that's in the internal service fund that Councilor Hamel had moved forward a couple of weeks ago and is in your bond vote tonight, and that's just a couple of $1,000s. So those are more or less housekeeping changes and don't impact the general fund because they're parts of the budget outside of the general fund. And that would be the combined amendments we would bring forward.
So does anybody want to add anything else to this list at this hour?
Or subtract, right?
You want to subtract?
No, or someone could subtract.
Or could subtract one, yes.
We've done that before.
So then I guess the next question would be, do we have consensus to move all of these items forward to the final budget deliberation? Yes? Counselor?
Yes. Yes.
Counselor Hamel?
Yeah.
Counselor
Yes.
Hosmer? All right, that was easy. We have consensus on all that. All right, so the only thing still up in the air then is the Colonial. And if you will bear with me for a few minutes here. I will walk you through what's before you tonight with reference to the handout that you have in front of you, or references to it. And then at the appropriate time, I'll recognize the city manager to explain the memo that he circulated on financing options. All right, so the first thing I want to say is the steering committee that I referred to earlier in the night that I've been serving on has decided that after 4 years of working on this project, the committee has decided that now is the time for closure, meaning this project, the restoration of the Colonial Theater, very quickly a decision needs to be made as to whether or not this project is going forward or it's dead forever, or at least for the foreseeable future. We want to break ground on this project in early October, and the steps to be outlined tonight will be a path toward that goal. As I mentioned earlier and at previous city council meetings, right now, there is a $3 million gap between the funds we have on hand or pledged and the projected cost, the remaining projected cost of the project. And we have decided after much discussion that the additional city funding is the only reasonable short-term solution to that problem. Meaning that either the city's going to step forward at this time and make it its project and fund the balance, or the project is going to be dead, because we simply can't wait for potential other sources of income that might develop in out years.
Mayor, just to get us off on the right foot with respect to the 3 million that you identified, that's not a one-time expenditure in the current year against the current budget.
I'm sorry?
The $3 million
No.
is not a one-time
No, I'll get to
expenditure.
that.
Yeah, but I just, up front, in terms of the public consuming this, I think it's.
Yeah, we're not going to spend $3 million or $6 million or whatever now. It's a long-term commitment, and we would finance it. That's what we'll get to later tonight. Is that what you're referring to?
Correct. So those people are concerned that this is going to drive us outside of our tax cap spending, would like to alleviate that concern up front.
All right, it will not. What's being put on the table tonight will not affect the tax cap in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you.
Okay. I would say up front that Bob and I, Councilor Hamel and I, and other members of the steering committee are still very much believe that seeing this restoration through is vital to the future of the economic vitality of our downtown, as well as Laconia and the Lakes region in general. And the only other thing I'll say on that at this point in time is, with permission, I'm going to quote my colleague to my left, Councilor Haynes, who said to me when we were discussing this a week or two ago, that we either believe in ourselves and our future or we don't. And to me, that's about as well as I've heard it put. And so I take pleasure in repeating that quote with your permission, Counselor. We will have, if this project goes through, a spectacular public auditorium in the midst of our central business district that will be the envy of many. And in the end, we will have, and this is very important, and in the end, we will have paid far less for this jewel than it will be worth. And I'm going to skip to the back page of that handout that I gave you is a memorandum from the Belknap Economic Development Council. And I should say, by the way, that with us tonight in the audience are the chairman of the Belknap Economic Development Council Board of Directors, Chris Kelly, and the executive director, Justin Slattery. And councilors, those two gentlemen are available to answer any questions you might have about BEDC's role or participation in this project. But there's a quote in here that I think is worth repeating, and that is from their overview. The project, the Colonial Project, is one of the largest historic preservation projects in New Hampshire history. While its design, performance, and technical capacity will make it one of the most advanced civic auditoriums in the state. So enough said on that front. Important point here. At this point in time, and this has to do with the numbers we'll be discussing tonight, the steering committee is committed to only looking forward. The numbers you have before you tonight do not include expenses on this project incurred to date that have already been paid for. We refer to those as stranded costs. Most of those are on Belknap EDC's part, which those stranded costs or total costs to date totaled about $2.5 million. And that includes the $1.4 million original purchase price, which we loaned the money on. And over $500,000 of the remaining number is architectural and engineering fees that have been paid in advance. Or not in advance, but the design work had to be done in previous years, and most of that's already been paid for. So we're estimating the total cost remaining to do the project to be $11 million. So if somebody asks you what was the total cost of the project if we included every nickel and dime that was ever spent in the last 4 years, you would have to add about $2.5 million to that, including the purchase of the building itself and the architectural engineering fees. So I guess the answer to that question is it's about a $13.5 million project all told if this goes forward. I'm happy to take any questions as we go along, by the way. The $3 million request for additional funds that's being made tonight is an outside number. Efforts are still being underway and will continue over the next couple of months to decrease that number. We're still working on some possible ideas for cutting the cost down, but it won't be major. It would be a few $100,000 at the most probably. But what we're telling the council tonight, the number of additional funds the city has pledged for this project would not exceed an additional $3 million. Page 1 of the handout I gave you walks us through the history of the city's financial involvement and shows you how we get to the $6.7 million number we are now asking the city to bring to closing. So I refer you to page 1 there. Our initial investment in the property was $1.4 million. At that same time, in 2015, we committed an additional $1.6 million of future investment to be brought to the closing, which never happened. So that was a total of $3 million. Then in 2017, we committed on the city's part to adding an additional investment of $1.2 million, okay? And then in just this year, we committed to purchase the theater equipment off budget, if you will, for an additional $900,000. All right, so that means as of today, via council resolution, our total commitment to this project is $5.1 million, of which the 1.4 is the only money that's been spent to date, and the only money that would be spent or will be spent until there is a closing. Okay, so tonight we're proposing an additional investment of $3 million. Okay, that would bring our proposed total commitment to $8.1 million. If you take out the initial investment, which we already paid, you see that the balance is $6.7 million, and that's the number we're talking about tonight. Okay? So if this project happens, we would need to bring to the closing $6.7 million, and that closing would be planned for probably late September. All right? And so the city manager is proposing that we borrow the $6.7 million. So tonight, to go to Councilor Lippman's point, that $6.7 million would be borrowed over an extended period of time to be decided still, probably a minimum of 20 years, possibly more than that, okay? So what we're talking about tonight, because we need a decision on this if we're gonna go forward in the immediate future, is we need to add money to the budget that's under consideration tonight, to the changes to that budget. We need to add that money to service the debt during the coming fiscal year to fit into this coming year's budget. So that's what we're talking about tonight, is fitting that debt service into this budget without going over the tax cap. And in a minute here, I'm going to recognize the city manager, and he's going to explain to us his recommendation for how we do that. Okay? While only, this is an important point to me, I want to stress this, while only a majority of the council, consensus-wise, is required to make these changes tonight, I point out that the Colonial project will not go forward without the support tonight of a supermajority of councilors. That is because the following borrowing authorization resulting will require a 2/3 vote. In other words, 4 of you are going to have to be willing to approve the final borrowing, okay? So even if 3 plus me tonight were in favor of adding this to the budget, it isn't going to do us any good. So the balance of power, if you will, on the council is a minimum of 4 of you need to agree that we're going forward with this project tonight. And if we don't have the 4 tonight, then this project is dead and over. Okay? Proposed timetable. We make the budget changes tonight with a minimum of 4 councilors agreeing. On July 8th, we have a first reading of the borrowing of $6.7 million at that council meeting, followed by a public hearing and final vote on July 22nd, the second meeting of July. Okay, so the final bond authorization would be July 22nd, according to this timetable. That will give our finance subcommittee and our city manager time to get the funds in hand by the projected September 30th closing date. So that's the proposed timetable, okay? You will recall before that the new market tax credit structure, which we never realized, called for a 7-year structure period for this deal. And we're not allowed to own the theater under that provision. Under that structure, we would not have been allowed to own the theater for 7 years. We would pay rent for 7 years and then buy the theater for the money we already had invested in it. And the rent would be basically paid by our charging interest to Belknap Economic Development Council for the money that we're loaning to them, okay? So that's kind of the circle we've talked about before. Now that the new markets are out of the picture, the controlling structure is the federal historic tax credits for $1.8 million that are still part of the funding stack, okay? And they, rather than a 7-year structure, dictate a 5-year structure. So even if we wanted to, and those funds are not available to municipalities or nonprofits. Those tax credits are only available to for-profit companies. So Belknap EDC, which is not a official nonprofit in the tax sense of the word, can apply for these tax credits and get them, but we can't. So they have to be the owners of the project for 5 years. So we will be renting the theater space from them over that 5-year period. And then at the end of that 5-year period, we will buy the theater from them in return for the forgiveness of the debt, the $6.7 million or $8.1 million, $6.1 million, $7 million that we loan to them. Okay, we'll forgive that debt and take title to the theater at that point in time for that price. Rusty McClear will rent the 2nd and 3rd floors of the Main Street building for that same 5-year period for the same reasons, and then he will buy them for $1. Okay? The rent he pays, and this is an important point, as well as the rent that comes into the project from the rental of the 4 storefronts for that 5-year period of time on Main Street, will go to the monthly pro forma and reduce the city's rent commitment. So the money that the McClears pay and the rent that the storefront leaseholders pay over that period will go into the pro forma along with our rent, the rent that we owe to reduce our rent burden, okay? The final piece of paper that I will refer to you, you can read it at your leisure, is a memorandum to us from the Belknap Economic Development Council that outlines much of the same stuff that I've already gone over, including the timeline there at the bottom of the first page. That has the same dates on it. You'll notice on the top of the second page, and I think this is an important point I want to make to you, you'll see 9-1 construction rebid. So I need to highlight the fact tonight that the bids that we had for the original project are now 2.5 years old. So that this project has to be rebid in order to get up-to-the-date bids. And our building contractor, Bonnet Page and Stone, is recommending that we hold off until September 1 to send the new documents out for rebid, because he thinks we'll get better prices once we get past the summer rush and whatnot. So the timetable calls for those specs to go back out by then. So we've got a couple of months to work on the redesigns we're tinkering with to cut the costs. And also to finalize our plans with the McClears in terms of who's paying what and exactly how much rent they'll pay. There's still some negotiations back and forth that have to do with the elevator and access to the second and third floors and with the rent that he will pay. We still haven't finalized that arrangement. But that'll all be in place by 9/1, and the bids will go out with the revised construction documents. The second page of the handout for you is, again, looking forward only. The income stack you see there, including the $3,000 million as proposed tonight, totaling $11.1 million, that's the money that we either have still on hand to this day, hasn't been spent, or the money we still have coming in pledges. Okay, everybody understand that? So that's not going back, as I said earlier, and recapturing any money that's already been spent. That's money that's still ahead of us. Likewise, under expenses, what this is saying is that our construction budget, including equipment now, equipment's back in again, including equipment, our construction budget is now $10.1 million. And as I said earlier, that possibly could be cut by a relatively small amount, perhaps several $100,000 between now and the time we actually go out to bid. But that's where the number is right now. And then the rest of those numbers there, starting with architecture and design, are so-called soft costs that remain to be encountered. So none of those totals there, adding up to the $1 million in soft costs, is anything paying a bill that's already been paid or trying to recoup an investment already made. These are all expenses yet to be incurred. Okay? So you can see within a few dollars there, that all balances out at $11.1 million, income and expenses. Okay? So before I get to Scott, any questions on what I've gone over so far? Councilor Lippman.
More of a statement than a question. I think that the presence of the McClears, problems are messages, and I think that, the problem of how to deal with the housing component and that we had to reconfigure the project to deal with that, we actually end up in a better position by having not just a reputable, but a marquee investor in terms of someone who is respected statewide and done many, many successful high-end projects. And I think that complements the plan here more than we could have ever thought.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, if it hasn't already been said tonight, which I think it has, is this is the McClears recognizing the future of Laconia, if you will, and betting on it, and betting that we're willing to put up our money too, to make this successful and to be forward-looking about this. So I think it's a bet on their part, and I'm hoping that we agree to meet that expectation tonight.
Councilor Hamel.
Councilor Hamel.
Just a comment also before Scott starts, and this has been a long project and process. If you think back, it's probably been 20 years or more that this colonial has been thought of to be refurbished, to bring back to its grandeur. Several committees over the decades have tried without success, a lot with good intention to try and make it to fruition, and it hasn't happened. This council and past councils over the 14 years I've been here has done nothing but invest in Laconia. And I think this project will do a lot for just not Laconia, but the Lakes region itself. And as Henry has stated, we have a premier investor that's willing to invest in Laconia. And that's quite something to get him on board. This can be an outstanding project. There's been a lot of naysayers, even from other towns. Says Laconia can't do it. Well, I think we can. And I think this will be a spectacular thing, just like the WOW Trail has been a great investment, the Riverwalk, other things we've done, new junior high school, new football field. You know, Laconia's moving forward. And I think we need to keep it that way. And I hope there's support tonight for it.
Well said, Counselor. Thank you. Anyone else?
If I might, Mayor, coming into this in the last few days, this was almost a bridge too far for me. The fact that Rusty has shown this interest has encouraged me tremendously. And honestly, the manager walked me through some things today that helped me get to where I am tonight. I've told several of you, I probably shouldn't admit this in public, but the first time I was in that theater was in 1949 when they pulled the screen down so we could watch cartoons. And I've loved the place ever since. Of course, I was just barely knee-high to a grasshopper, but I am going to support this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. All right, as an introduction then, what's on the agenda now is, as we described earlier, what we're talking about tonight is the debt service on a $6.7 million borrowing. And the first installments of that debt service would have to be included in next year's budget, the next fiscal year's budget. And so I'm going to recognize the city manager here to explain to us his proposal for how we can fit that debt service in our budget without violating the tax cap.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and that's the point I'll start with. Any of my suggestions tonight are meant to keep the city council and this city within its tax cap and to make them solid recommendations that are sustainable going forward. Nothing that's going to fall apart of, oh, it worked for 2 years and now we're in a hurt and we've got to find some money to pay debt service in year 3 or something like that. So I don't have the perfect scenario for you tonight until a few more pieces fall into place, and some of that ties in with the state budget and what may or may not come. But even if nothing materializes in the state budget, I still think we have a solid pathway to get us there. So referring to this simple sheet, and some of this is a little outdated based on some action the council's taken tonight. This was just kind of a working, instead of me scratching it on a note paper because my handwriting's so terrible, it was typing it on a computer. So simple numbers. To do a $6.7 million bond for the Colonial over 20 years on our estimates would be about $465,000 annually for debt service. If we went for a 25-year bond, that would drop the debt service down to $400,000. So how do we come up with that? Several pieces are out there. Well, first of all, if we issue debt somewhere in fiscal year 20, the entire payment will not be due in that fiscal year. So there's an opportunity to help step it in. So our two scenarios for issuing debt would either be to go through local banks, like we've done with the bond items before you tonight. We went out and we had 5 bids on one of the bonds and 4 bids on the other bond, all from local banks and competitive. Have to have those conversations about whether there was one lender who was interested in a larger project of the $6.7 million scope, or maybe being the lead banking institution and working with some others and partnering on this. I would like to think that at least one, if not more, of our local banks would be proud to stand up and say that they were the lender for the Colonial Theater project and use it on their annual report or whatever else they publish. So that's a discussion that would happen immediately, is to start seeing who's interested in that dollar amount or who partnering would be interested. If that were the case, we would need the money, as the mayor alluded to, by September 30th. So that would mean if it's a local bank, we would go through the process, we would get the proceeds to bring to the table, which are needed, and we certainly would have at least a partial year's interest and some debt service falling somewhere in the spring of 2020, but in next year's budget. back of the envelope is we probably need somewhere in the area of $200,000 to $230,000 if that were to be the scenario, to cover the partial year's interest and some principal payment. The other option is to go through the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank, which is set up to work with communities and use the full backing of the Municipal Bond Bank for credit rating and package things out that they can sell nationally. The bond bank typically issues debt twice a year. They just completed a sale earlier this month, and the next one is slated to close in January, with proceeds being available in February. So I understand that not getting money till February, we need to bring it to the table by September 30th. If we didn't find interest locally with the lenders, we would look to go to the Municipal Bond Bank, and we would need to go out and borrow what they call a bond anticipation note, BAN for short, to bridge that money for a short-term loan at short-term interest rates until we got the bond bank issuance in February. We've estimated that that interest probably would run us $75,000 in order to get that BAN, to get us to bring the money to the table to close, and then go through the bond bank issuing in February. The timing of the bond bank schedule is that we would, close in January, we would get the proceeds in February, and the first interest payment with the bond bank does not occur on their calendar until August of the following fiscal year. So $75,000 is roughly all we would need to put in to cover interest in the fiscal year budget that we're working in. So kind of worst case scenario, $230,000, maybe a best case scenario of $75,000. It actually works out pretty well because it does allow us to step in that piece in the first year and then be able to build upon it. So where do we come up with any money? And then in its entirety, where do we come up with $400,000 or $465,000? Because again, we don't want this just to look good for 2 years and now we've drained our savings accounts and our reserve accounts and we're scrambling to find the money. So as Mr. Wood spoke tonight, I kind of ran a worst-case scenario of what the TIF could support if we kind of maxed it out but never let the TIF run negative, and made some assumptions of very conservative growth in the district of 2% annually. And the TIF could support $210,000 of an annual payment. And Mr. Wood is correct. That would pretty much look to hamstring them from other projects for a significant number of years. But I do have the copies of the pro forma that I can leave with you to take home and review. But in layman's terms, $210,000 would be the maximum could come out of the TIF annually. And that would run solid for all 20 or 25 years.
Questions?
Scott, is the 210 assuming the 20-year borrowing timeframe?
That's based on the 20, but even on the 25, the numbers would, it would probably allow a little bit more over a 25-year.
Yeah, it's not covering the whole nut, so it's.
Yeah. So we still would need to come up with another $200,000 or $250,000, depending on a 20-year or a 25-year borrowing.
My question was, assuming we took the portion or percentage that you're assuming from the TIF district, and were you assuming that at a 465 or the 400 annual debt service?
We did that over the 20 years. We based that on a
So there would be.
Well, we just based it on what could it support, because we knew it wasn't going to cover the whole debt service. So 210 is what the TIF can support, period, regardless of whether we go 20 years or 25 years. The TIF could max out at
That's the max
$210,000 a year, and still its low point would never be lower than $125,000 in net balance. So we didn't even try to get it down to, $10,000 or less. We tried to leave a little cushion. And again, that's a very conservative 2% growth rate in there. So what other options?
Would never be less than 125 in the account
128 would be the low point in year 14.
at 2%.
At 2% growth annually to the assessment base within the district, yes. Other monies that we could look at. Well, we transferred $100,000 into the non-capital reserve account at the last meeting, bringing that balance up to close to $300,000. That's a significant amount of money. If the council wanted to use that $100,000 towards the Colonial, it could reverse that decision, and we still would have close to $200,000 in that non-capital reserve. Typically, there might be 1, 2, maybe 3 projects a year that might use funds out of the non-cap, and they tend to be along the lines of what Councilor Hammond was speaking about, a carpet replacement in the area of $20,000 or something else for $25,000. They're not, so there's plenty of money there if we were looking to transfer $100,000 back out. This budget calls for reducing the amount of fund balance that we're using in the budget from 830,000 to 770, and I shared with the council back in, I don't know if it was March or April when I presented the budget, that we've slowly been weaning ourselves from the use of fund balance from over $1 million a year down to 770. If we wanted to go back and use the same 830 we did last year, there's $65,000 that could be found, again, without a significant impact. We've talked about the 414,000 that we're optimistic about in the revenue sharing. That's a possibility. I would put strong money that either money's coming to the city and the school, or it's coming to one or the other. It's not all being eliminated. So thinking ahead about even if the city got no money, but the schools got 400,000 this fiscal year, and they'd be slated to get 800,000 next fiscal year, in my mind, that would free up the $300,000 safety net that we just put in the education account, because we already heard from the schools today that if they get the 400, they're not even going to use the reserve money they were planning on using, and that would leave them 600,000 in their reserve account, in addition to potentially getting 800,000 additional funds the following year. So I think our 5-year commitment and the need for that $300,000 goes away. It could be repurposed. If for some reason no money materialized for education, then I believe the money would materialize on the school side of the equation, and then we wouldn't touch the 300,000, but we would have the revenue sharing in excess of 400,000 a year.
On the city side.
On the city side. So I think there's a number of things. I think what we need to do is, Glenn and I probably need to discuss this a little more based on your vote tonight, is look at what is that placeholder that we need for worst case year one, half-year principal and interest, and I'm guessing that number is probably going to be that $230,000, and we would put that in as an appropriation in the budget, so we'd have the ability to spend it, and we probably would identify it as a transfer in from some other existing account, and that could be determined at any point as we go through this process. A portion of it could come from the TIF. A portion of it could come from the non-cap reserve account. If the money materialized in the revenue sharing through the state budget, a portion of it could come there. We've got options. I think either way it's going to come, we're identifying it as a transfer of funds coming in from some existing source. So without knowing how all the pieces of the puzzle are going to fall with the state budget, I'm comfortable in saying we're very solid for year one, and I fully believe by working through this and stepping it in with some existing pots of money to soften the blow, that we can phase it in at about $100,000 additional each year over the next 3 years to get us to the full amount without crowding out other spending, without saying, well, we're just funding the Colonial this year, I've got no money for streets for you, or there's no money for new recreation equipment or anything else. I'm very comfortable these options are here, and while I can't tell you which exact path we should take tonight, I think what I've laid out gives you the comfort that we could put a transfer amount in and then work through the process depending on whether we went through local lenders or whether we went through the bond bank, and then what the dollar amount needs to be.
So what are you recommending we do tonight?
I would recommend that you provide guidance to us to amend the budget resolution to recognize that we're going to have an additional expenditure of $230,000 for the worst case principal and interest half-year repayment. And then we would put in additional revenue of funds to be transferred in from TIF, non-cap reserve,
No
et cetera.
effect on the bottom line of the.
No effect on the bottom line.
All right, so we're looking at approximately something in the neighborhood of $230,000 additional the first year for debt service with no effect on the bottom line.
But that would be in 2020, you're saying?
That would be in the budget
In
you're
the fall.
adopting. So we would roll this into the changes that you've already approved tonight. We could offer an amendment to that to include those placeholders of 230 on both sides of the ledger. I know I was asked about what does this do to our debt service, and I've got some pages that came out of the CAFR. You all got a copy of the comprehensive annual financial report, and I've got copies to leave with you tonight. But rather than get into the weeds and try to read through 4 pages, our per capita debt in 2009 was $2,200 per person. The councils have been very conservative, and even with inflation and budgets increasing, our per capita debt in 2018 is $2,270. So we've gone up negligible amounts. We have significant amount of debt space available to us by the state formula, which deals with assessments and backing out revenue and school bonds. And then if you look at another item as debt expense as a percentage of your overall general fund expense, so are you paying cash more than you are borrowing? In 2009, our debt service was 8% of the general fund budget, and in 2018, we were at 6.9% of the general fund budget. So again, these councils have continued to be conservative in their approach, and we are not debt heavy. So taking on this additional $6.7 million is not going to jeopardize our financial position by any stretch.
Scott, can I ask a quick question?
Counselor
Scott, where does that, the council for many, many, many years have kind of gone along with the guideline of interest and principal payments being around the $3 million a year mark or so. Was it?
3.2.
3.2. How?
That was
where-
net of school aid.
Pardon?
That was net of school aid.
School aid, yeah. Where will that run us about?
I didn't look at it today, but I would have to assume that's going to put us a little bit over, but that was a self-imposed, and again, we've tried to do a bump up of the $2.5 million street bonds to get a jump on our streets lately, so I think it would over, but I think when you look at the debt as a percentage of general fund and the per capita and the space that we have under a conservative state formula, we've got balance sheets that a lot of towns would be envious of in terms of our debt or lack thereof on the books.
Yeah, because we've confined ourselves to roughly that 3.2 million for that reason.
And that's why I've showed, so on a percentage of general fund, we're less now than we were in 2009, and per capita
That
even.
number dates back to 2005 or 6.
Yeah.
So
Because we've always
No
waited,
inflation factor.
Yep, so very solid in room, and again, not that, we need to be cautious going forward, but I'm not at all uncomfortable about the position that would put us in to do that.
Okay, because we've delayed other projects just for bonds to fall off our sheets.
And we still have debt that falls off every year
Yep.
on a declining basis, so.
Okay, great.
Okay, any other questions or comments? So what we have before us tonight then is our final item of proposed budget adjustment is to add $230,000 approximately worth of debt service for the Colonial Project for fiscal year 2020. Right? And with the sources of that to be determined.
A transfer in, but of a source to be
Right,
determined,
to
we
be
would bring back for your authority
No
to
additional
transfer.
revenue raised.
Correct.
Okay. So again, to remind you what the timeline on this would be, and that is that the city manager will bring us back at our next meeting on July 8th with the budget, which would include these changes to it, and that budget would be up for approval by a majority vote, or we could delay the vote for 2 weeks if we didn't feel comfortable approving it on the 8th. In addition to that, if we have a consensus on this tonight, the city manager is going to come forward on July 9th with a proposal for this first reading for us to borrow $6.7 million. And that will require a 2/3 majority vote to approve.
It'll be a first reading to go to a public hearing, and you'll actually take that vote on July 22nd. So the 230 placeholder would be part of adopting the budget.
Right.
The bond authorization would need two nights.
votes,
It would
yeah.
need the
We have
8th
to-
and the
We have to vote
22nd.
first reading that night and then public hearing and second reading on July 22nd.
Correct.
And that final passage would require a 2/3 majority vote.
Scott, when would you go out for bid or inquiry on the interest rates to the different banks?
We'd probably start the discussions with the local banks. If you give us consensus tonight, we want to start talking about who's interested, if they are, as a standalone entity at that dollar amount, and kind of figure out where the local players are with that, and then determine whether we need to try to work to bundle a couple of local banks together, if that's the interest, or if there's not appetite, and if there's not, then we definitely would be reaching out to the bond bank and letting them know of our intention of coming forward for their January offering.
I was just wondering in our proposal to the banks that maybe we put in there as part of the proposal that they consider whatever their percentage rate would be to reduce that rate to a certain basis point as a contribution back to the city towards the theater.
They can be creative on their own. We've had one of the bid responses for our bonds we're discussing tonight who was creative. I know some of the banks have stepped up. I don't have the numbers in front of me, and some of the banks have already stepped up and made contributions. So to go back and say something else, again, they have shareholders in some cases to answer to and stuff. But I know the banks know how to be creative.
Okay.
There are no shareholders. All three banks that contributed to the project are mutual savings
Okay,
banks.
but we do get bids from 2 additional banks beyond that, so.
They could be one of the ones that didn't contribute.
I think the banks can certainly, there's all kinds of ways banks can be creative on it.
Okay, so I'm gonna go around the room, around the table here
I
and,
just have
I'm
just a
sorry,
couple
Counselor
of
Bounds.
questions. Yeah, just a couple of questions. I don't know if you and Bob can handle these questions, and I've asked them before, and I'm going to ask them again. I want to know, because we're going to need every penny from all the committed funds that we have, and I just want to know at this point in the time whether those funds that we've committed, that we've relied on in coming up with this $11 million figure, are relatively safe in terms of our ability to close at the end of September and put a shovel in the ground on October 1st, which is what I want to do.
Justin, is he back there somewhere? You want to address that? Counselor Bounds is asking in the funding stack whether all the non-city elements of that funding stack are sure deals.
Yes, good evening, everybody. The answer is yes.
Just a straight, flat yes, Justin.
We're ready to go.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Next question.
2, your soft construction costs, is that the anticipation of what the costs are going to increase because of the 2.5-year lag between bid 1 and?
Well, that's in hard costs.
That's in hard costs.
We took the total amount of the bids of the project as originally designed and added 10% inflation factor, which was a recommendation made to us by Bonnet Page and Stone. So we took the original bids, added 10%, and that's what that $10,122,000 number is.
So that is, in fact, taking into account what additional inflation is going to do to the cost of the construction?
10%.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know. And that's, could be a plus, could be a minus, but we're not anticipating anything more than the $1 million in soft construction costs?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Those are the costs, again, to remind you, that are still in front of us, not paying any past
Yeah, I got that. Yeah.
work to be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to go around the table in reverse order. We're looking for a consensus again here, so just give me a nod, yes or no, as to whether or not you're in favor of adding the $230,000 debt service to the budget proposal that we'll have before us on July 8th. A yes?
Yes.
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 Wow. Unanimous. We have a unanimous consensus to go forward with the Colonial project. Thank you, gentlemen, very much, and thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
Oh, there's a headline for tomorrow, huh?
No, I won't make the deadline.
Or the next day. Yeah,
That'll be
yeah,
a
we're
fun-
already at 9:19.
That'll be a headline
Yeah.
that'll generate some comments.
All right, back to our agenda if I can find it. All right, we're on to item A, second reading and approval of ordinance 2019-14 to amend Chapter 235 zoning, creating a new urban commercial zone, and that is on page
35?
35,
Oh, no,
is
that's
that right?
carry forwards. I'm
That
sorry.
would be 41.
41.
Sorry, 41, page 41, you're right. Yeah, that's the multi-page thing here. All right, so Counselor Bounds briefly discussed this earlier, and Dean came up and explained it from the city standpoint. So tonight, what we would be doing is moving a reading of the ordinance on second reading tonight, and then the final vote. So we've already had the public hearing on this, and so the question before the council is, are we ready to adopt this at this point in time? And are there any remaining questions about it? Everybody know what we're talking about here? This is basically, again, the combining of a whole bunch, 6 or something or other, different zones into one, and making everything basically along Court Street and Union Avenue, all the way from the Belmont Town Line to the Guilford Town Line, one zone. That's basically the city's commercial zone. Okay? All right, so you have the ordinance itself starting on page 42. A motion would be in order to waive the reading of this ordinance in its entirety tonight and to read by title only. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion. Counselor Lippman seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. Next up would be to move second reading of ordinance 14, amending chapter 235 zoning article 3-14, districts establish an accompanying map.
Make that motion.
Counselor Lippman makes a motion. Second, Counselor Bounds.
I second that.
Seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. And finally, a move to approve ordinance 14, amending chapter 235 zoning article 3-14, districts established, and the accompanying map. Counselor Bounds, would you like the pleasure?
I'd like Henry to do it, and I'll second it.
All
How's
right.
that?
Counselor Lippman makes the motion. Counselor Bounds seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries, and thank you to both the counselors who made the motion for their work on this particular project. Okay, now we're on to the exciting topic of off-street parking and loading requirements. This will thrill a minute, isn't it? Dog warrants and this on the same night. Okay, a second reading and approval of ordinance 45, amending chapter 235 zoning, article 8-45, paragraph C, off-street parking and loading requirements, driveways, and access. And that is on page 48.
What number is that?
It's on page 48 of your packet.
Okay.
And we will be moving tonight this on second reading again like the first one.
I think it's page 46, Mr. Mayor.
40, oh, I'm sorry. My eyes are not that good. 6s and 8s.
6 and 8.
Okay, any questions or comments before we get to approving this? Okay, a motion would be in order to waive the reading of this ordinance in its entirety and to read tonight by title only. Counselor Hamel makes that motion. Counselor Hayes seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Second motion to be in order would be to approve a second reading of ordinance 45, amending chapter 235 zoning article 8-45, paragraph C, covering off-street parking and loading requirements, driveways, and access. Someone make that motion, please. Counselor Hosmer, seconded by Counselor Bounds. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. And finally, final vote to move to approve ordinance 45, amending chapter 235 zoning, article 8-45, paragraph C, regarding off-street parking and loading requirements, driveways, and access. Counselor Bounds? Second by Counselor Hamel. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. So that one is behind us. Next up is second reading and approval of Resolution 16. Well, that's the first one we had the public hearing on tonight. This is a second reading and approval of Resolution 16 relative to authorizing the city manager to take any actions necessary to issue bonds for Court Street reconstruction Phase 2, fire engine replacement, and adding a new public works truck in the total amount of $2,025,000. Any questions or comments before we get to motions? First motion to be in order would be to move a reading of Resolution 16 and waive a reading of Resolution 16 in its entirety and to read tonight by title only. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion. Counselor Haynes seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in affirmative, that motion carries. Next up is a motion to approve on second reading Resolution 16, a resolution relative to authorizing the city manager to take any actions necessary to issue bonds for Court Street reconstruction Phase 2 for fire engine replacement and for a new public works truck in the total amount of $2,025,000. Counselor Hosmer makes the motion. Counselor Hamel seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries as well. And finally, final motion on Resolution 16, a resolution relative to authorizing the city manager to take any actions necessary to issue bonds for Court Street reconstruction Phase 2, fire engine replacement, and a new public works truck in the total amount of $2,025,000. How about this side of the table? Counselor Bowens makes the motion, seconded by Counselor Lippman. Any discussion?
Just after we take this vote, assuming it passes, we need to schedule a meeting of the Finance Committee.
To talk about terms and
In
financing.
terms of this one, and if we consider 17 as well.
Yeah. We got 2 of these, so let's get through
Yep.
these 2, and
Sure.
then we can go back and do that. All right, any further discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. All right, and then the next one we had the public hearing on earlier tonight is second reading and approval of Resolution 17 to authorize the city manager to take any actions necessary to issue bonds for Endicott Street Water Line Project, the Court Street Bridge Replacement Project, and sewer upgrades, Union Avenue and Lakeport Elm Street Project in the total amount of $2,250,000. Any questions before we get to motions? All right, first motion then in order would be to waive a reading of Resolution 17 in its entirety and to read tonight by title only. Counselor Bounds makes that motion, seconded by Counselor Lippman. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you for your patience on all of this. Second motion order to be approved on second reading, Resolution 17, a resolution relative to authorizing the city manager to take any actions necessary to issue bonds for Endicott Street Water Line Project, the Court Street Bridge Replacement Project, and sewer upgrades, Union Avenue and Elm Street Project in the total amount of $2,250,000. Moved by Counselor Haynes, seconded by Counselor Hosmer. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. And finally, on this subject, a motion to approve Resolution 17, or final approval of Resolution 17, a resolution relative to authorizing the city manager to take any actions necessary to issue bonds for the Endicott Street Water Line Project, the Court Street Bridge Replacement Project, and sewer upgrades to Union Avenue and Lakeport Elm Street Project in the total amount of $2,250,000. Made by Counselor Haynes, seconded by Counselor Hamel. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. All right.
Mayor, I make a motion that Finance Committee review the financing for 16 and 17 resolutions after the July 18th regular meeting.
After the July 8th?
July 8th, yes.
After the meeting?
Yes.
After the July 8th meeting. Are we going to need a non-public that night?
No, I can wait on that one.
We're going to wait on that? Okay. All right, so a motion has been made to hold a meeting of the Finance Committee on the evening of July 8th, after the adjournment of the regular city council meeting to discuss the financing packages for the 2 resolutions just passed. Is there a second to that motion? Counselor Hamel seconds the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries, and the meeting has been scheduled. Okay. Thank you for your patience in the audience. The next item on the agenda is the proposed Laconia Historic Overlay District. And that, in your packet, starts on page 52. And who are we going to recognize here for an introduction to this?
I can just walk you through it briefly, and Councilor Bounds, as Chair of Government Ordinances, can chime in if he wants. But as you are well aware, Mayor and Council, this came to the city a few weeks back. It was assigned to the Government Ordinances Committee. They held a couple of working meetings, great input from some residents in drafting a document, and I know a couple of city councilors here were actively involved in that as well. Went through a couple of iterations, had a lot of public input opportunity. I know the committee voted unanimously to bring it to the council tonight with a request to refer it to the planning board, and then if the planning board accepts it, it would then be referred to public hearing at the planning board level, but by accepting it, the next business day would constitute the posting of these changes, because you adopted the RSA last week that escapes me right now, but the one that says the posting, the date, so it's a lot of numbers tonight. But anyway, if the planning board accepts it and refers it to the public hearing to continue the process, the next day, this will be posted, and it would kind of freeze, and any permits that came in that were not in compliance with what was proposed here would be held until there was a determination as to whether this district was approved through the process. If permits were requested and they didn't have any conflict with what was proposed, we would go ahead and issue them normally. Planning board will go through its process, public hearing, make a recommendation back to the council, and then the council has an opportunity to have a public hearing, offer their own input, amendments, et cetera, onto it, and then formally adopt at some point if that's the desire.
Okay, Counselor Bounds, you want to give us a brief overview of the highlights of this?
I just want to emphasize that this is a work in progress. I know that members of the committee worked hard to come up with some suggested amendments, that members of the public worked very hard to put together these proposals. I think the council needs to take this seriously in terms of what we're doing. And again, it's a work in progress. That doesn't mean it's going to be a extended work in progress. I anticipate that the planning department and the planning board will work to act as quickly as possible. But as you all know, and has been said many times, this is how it's got to go. It's got to go from here to the planning board. The planning board will deliberate, perhaps make changes to the proposed ordinance, and then eventually take a vote on whether it should go to public hearing or not, which will freeze the ordinance. That's it.
And then, as far as process is concerned, we have to send this to the planning board. That's the next step for their deliberation and their recommendation, in quotes.
They make a recommendation.
They may come back and recommend to us that we either approve it as is, we approve it with amendments they suggest, or that we don't approve it.
If the planning board will send it out, we'll put together a proposal for a zoning overlay district, for an historic overlay district. And then that proposal will go to public hearing. If after the public hearing there are significant changes, material changes,
Then they do it again.
they'll have to do the material changes and send it to another public hearing.
But
which
what I
is-
want to stress is, in any case, whatever happens at the planning board, it has to come back here.
The planning board, that's
Only the
right.
city council can approve it.
Only the city council can approve it. Only the city council.
Right.
So it will come back here for final approval.
And then we can have another public hearing or
And then
more
we can have
if we
another,
want.
and we should have another public hearing. I say that a lot, don't I? And then we'll see what happens.
So tonight, you're recommending that the proposal go to the planning board as drafted.
As drafted, yes.
Now, what happens to the recommendations? I don't see them in the packet that were made by the planning director.
There were some recommendations that we adopted. One of the recommendations is that we include Veterans Square in the overlay district so that we wouldn't be subject to spot zoning. I imagine that there's going to be other recommendations that, and are those part of the record here? Or, yeah, so everybody can look at those.
So the proposed district as currently outlined runs from west to east, from Prescott Florist end of the train station, all the way to and including,
Veterans Square, the library, and the St. Joe's property.
right, three buildings on the St. Joe's property.
That's correct.
I just want to clarify Veterans Park, not Veterans Square. So it's Veterans Park, library, and the church property, which
Train
has three
station,
structures.
Veterans Park.
Yes.
The library, both buildings of the library, the Buzzell Mansion, the St. Joseph Church, and the Holy Trinity School. And
I've been calling that thing the wrong thing all these years.
Well, Veterans Square is the square, the park is the park.
Okay, so everybody understands that. So that's what you're recommending tonight?
Yes.
Okay. So any questions or comments before we get to any motions tonight? Counselor Hamel?
I have a comment. I'm going to vote to send this on, but I think the enforcement in here is still too heavy-handed on the authority of the Historic Commission or panel. I think the same outcome can be had without a lot of this ability to change or eliminate or not allow things to be done at the homes. So, like I said, I'll vote to send this on to the planning board, but I think there's still work that needs to be done on this to lessen that a little bit, because I don't want to handcuff people looking to come into the community and maybe buying a house in a historic district and finding out what they have to go through, that they may decide to pass on it, so.
I've got a dual role. I'm the council's liaison, and I'm also have a vote with respect to this on the planning board. So in my role as liaison, and I've done this before, I've made everybody on the planning board aware of concerns that the council may have. So I'm going to do that.
Thank you.
So anyone else? So I would second what Counselor Hamel has just said, in the sense that from discussions I have had with members of council regarding what's been proposed to date, I would say that I have two things to add, and councilors are more than welcome to speak for themselves, obviously. But I think the concerns that I have heard on the council, expressed by council members in terms of looking forward to a final approval at some point in time on this, is one, what he said, that the provisions of this not be overly restrictive on private property. I think people have concerns that when you get down to somebody telling you can't change the doorknob or something or other without approval, or they don't like the doorknob you picked out or something like that, that's probably gone too far. And I know from personal experience, from reading, that our neighbor Gilmanton, for example, has a historic overlay district in the area of the Smith Meeting House.
Yeah.
And they trapped a bunch of houses in that zone when they proposed it that are not historic in any way, shape, or form. And some of the landowners there have been extremely upset when they've tried to make improvements to their property and told that, no, it has to look like it might have looked in the 1700s or something or other, when their properties were built in the 1960s. You know, that sort of thing. So that's a concern. And the second concern is, I think we have unanimity at this point on the council that the district, the beginning district as presently outlined, is appropriate. But I think if the planning board or whomever starts reaching out and wanting to encompass other buildings in the downtown area immediately in this proposal, that could run into issues on the council. I think we're all in unanimous support of the buildings that are currently outlined, but we would want to be very cautious about adding any additional buildings at this point in time without real serious consideration.
Well, if we do establish the historic commission, it becomes a little bit easier to add specific districts if you think there's a need for that. So I'll bring all those concerns to the planning board.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? All right, are we ready to vote? Okay, a motion be in order to refer these proposed zoning ordinances regarding the historic overlay district to the planning board for their consideration and recommendation. Counselor Bounds makes that motion.
I guess I do.
Is there a second? Counselor Haynes seconds the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you for those of you who are here tonight for that issue, for bearing with us for so long. So we have one more item of unfinished business tonight, not an easy one. and that is the short-term rental proposal. Before you, starting on page 68 of your packet, is a proposal to amend City Code 235 zoning by creating a new definition, lodging, short-term, and corresponding regulations for this type of use under residential accessory uses. And again, tonight, this has come out now of the planning, of the ordinance committee. And the next step would be, if desired, would be to send this proposal on to the planning board for that same recommendation that we just talked about. And Counselor Bounds, you want to address this?
Yeah, this came, this took us a while, and Dean and the planning staff, I've got to say thank you to for the hard work you put into coming up with this proposal. The proposal is very specific. It has the structure for a fee. No fee has been decided as to what it would cost. There's things that are a little up in the air. For example, it says for a period of no longer than 12 times per year, or a period of 184 days or something like that. And that may need to be changed on recommendations from the planning department, since that kind of language, the 12 separate rentals, could create a problem down the road. But again, this is a work in progress. I think it's a pretty good starting point outline for it. As I indicated, this came from the council to begin with, out of, I think, the mayor's concerns and other concerns about the fact that we didn't have, we prohibited short-term rentals in a large portion of the city, so that would make a substantial change. And the proposal is to send it on to the planning board, have them tweak it if necessary, send it out for public hearing, and bring it back to the council for consideration, another public hearing, and then adoption, yea or nay.
Any questions or comments? I have a couple,
Okay.
if I may. I know you guys had this discussion at your committee meeting, but I don't see anything here that exempts the two weir zones from the provisions of this.
You mean the two zones that allow it now?
Yes.
We had that discussion. I think that go ahead.
I mean, this would put restrictions on those two zones that don't currently exist.
The commercial resort and the shorefront residential zones allow the rooming and boarding houses with obviously an administrative approval. Under this proposal, and as a result of the committee meeting or 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, what we're proposing is that in the CR and the SFR zones, that we would not put a restriction on the number of rentals in those two zones, and then the remaining zones,
They would still have to register.
but they would still have to register, yes.
So where is that language, or is that to be added?
That would be under, basically what we're doing here is we're taking this kind of activity, which we acknowledge has been going on in the city for decades, and instead of trying to fit it into an existing definition, i.e. the rooming and boarding houses, we are creating a new definition for the short-term lodging. And we're saying that it is allowable in all zones except for the 3 industrial zones.
Okay, that's item number 5, where it says except for.
Right, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank
At the very beginning, under M, it says it's available for all zones except for the 3 industrial zones. And then later on, we are limiting the number of rentals in all zones except for the SFR and the CR zone.
Okay, thank you. My second question, Counselor, also involves that same item 5. I know you all had some discussions about this, about the 12 separate rentals and a maximum of 184 nights. I believe the 184 nights is in reference to state law with regard to the rooms and meals tax? Is
That's
that correct?
correct.
That that's what they consider short-term
Right.
lodging? And the 12 separate rentals, I assume, is an arbitrary number. All right, okay, so
Pretty-
that can be worked out. That's not my issue. My issue is, and I think you guys touched on this at at your last committee meeting, is how in the world are we going to enforce this?
You know what, my response to that is this, that enforcement is always an issue, always. No matter what ordinance you adopt and what you don't. We're going to enforce this in the same way we enforce other ordinances. We're going to get reports from people who are affected by this, and they're going to say, this is going on.
Well, the difference, though, is the building
But we're not-
code enforcement officer can use his senses to detect violations as well without a report from somebody.
Well, that's all true, but I don't envision we're going to send out the code enforcement officer to go check out all the short-term rentals and make sure that everybody's in
What I'm going to
compliance.
suggest is, would it be too burdensome, and I'm just throwing this out there, to have a provision in here that you could add at a later date, or the planning board could add, I don't know exactly how to structure it, that would require people who go into this business or who are on this business to keep accurate records that could be viewed at any time by the city upon request.
That's certainly a possibility. A lot of people are going to treat that as kind of onerous, but that's certainly a way to,
I mean, that would be a simple business record, right? This is how many
no,
nights I had somebody staying here, and if somebody called up and complained, as you said, and said, you know, they're violating this, we would simply ask to see their records.
I'm not suggesting that you can't do it. What I am suggesting is that we can think about it and see what it does, but whether you call it a simple business record or not, somebody's going to say, that's onerous. That's like too much paperwork, that's too much of this and too much of that. Somebody's going
Well,
to
if
say.
they're not keeping track of that anyway, I would,
They should be keeping track for their own records of what's going on.
Yeah.
They should be. So,
because otherwise, if you get a report from a neighbor that says, you know, this guy's renting the house year-round and, you know, on Shore Drive or something or other, and it's there every weekend or something, or whatever it is, and so you go investigate, I don't see how we get out of a he said, I mean, your penalty is to order a cease and desist, correct? So what's your evidence for a cease and desist order, that the neighbor complained?
well, I assume that there's going to be a mechanism whereby we can inspect the records of the short-term rental owner.
Okay.
I expect that
That's
will
all
be.
I'm suggesting, is
Yeah,
there
okay.
should be some record-keeping
All right.
requirement here. I'm sorry I didn't think of this earlier, but it occurred to me when I was reading Dane's comments about the numbers and whatnot and his suggestions. Okay, sorry to delay that. Any other questions or comments about this proposal? So basically, just like we had the previous discussion, the recommendation out of the zoning committee is, out of the ordinance committee, is to recommend this to the planning board as written, as before you tonight, okay? You
Yep.
want to make that motion, Counselor?
I'll make that motion.
All right, Counselor Bounds moves to refer these proposed zoning amendments to the planning board as submitted. Is there a second? Counselor Cheney seconds that motion. Any discussions? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you.
Okay. so
Council comments.
It's
I always
Too
look
late
at
to
Counselor
comment.
Cheney first there, huh?
I certainly wouldn't want to prolong the agony. I just had two quick
Well, we
questions.
got 10 minutes to spare here. I hate to say
No,
that.
you don't
but-
get two quick questions. You get one quick question.
I may have missed it, but is there a status of the property bordering the Public Works property that we were talking about possibly purchasing?
We have purchased that house, and I know we went out to bid, and I believe the house is raised as well.
Really?
Yes,
Wow. Who knew?
I guess Glenn did.
All right, any other?
Secondly.
Secondly,
Yes,
all
sir.
right, you're on a roll.
Yeah, I am. I'm waiting for the brickwork at the boat.
On the
place.
chimney?
Yeah.
I've been wondering about that myself.
And I wondered if anybody could tell me what the status is or when it was gonna
You
happen.
mean the Lakeport Landing?
Yeah.
Hose tower, brick?
I'm sorry, I missed the question. I was celebrating.
Sure why.
Yes, the center structure on the marina building is intended to be clad in what will look like brick from the street.
Right.
I'm not sure exactly what kind of material they're using, but the idea is to look like brick from the street and to try to mimic the hose tower that was at the original station. That's the idea.
So his question is, when are they gonna do that?
They still have some finishing touches to do. We're still holding a site security bond, so I don't know the exact timetable, but we certainly can raise the issue with the property owner. She is in on a regular basis, so we can raise that issue.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council comments? Clock is ticking down, all right. In lieu of that, we have no need for blessedly for a non-public tonight. So I'm going to declare this meeting adjourned at 9:52 PM, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your work, Cheryl.
Tip pro forma and some information on our debt
Take tomorrow off.
service that's in the CAFR as well.
Thank you.